إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد بعدد كل داء ودواء وبارك وسلم عليه وعليهم كثيرا اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد بعدد كل داء ودواء وبارك وسلم عليه وعليهم كثيرا.
Okay, excellent. So this is what we got up to last week. So let's start from here again. Sorry for my slow speeches because I'm not too well. Right, so we mentioned what the mu'allaqat are. Can somebody tell me what they are and what they are famous for? Can somebody tell me? Hello, I've got 4 people in the class. Should I pick a name? Shahid. Can you not hear?
Assalamu alaikum, Ustad.
Alaikum salam
The
wa rahmatullah.
collection, Mulaqat, the collection of poems that were hanging, that were hung on the Kaaba. I understand.
Excellent, well done. And why have they been preserved? Does everybody rave about them?
Because they were like Umar al-Qais, he was like the famous poet who wrote them, and they were supposed to be like the ranked as the best.
Yeah, the pinnacle of Arab eloquence. Poetry was the pinnacle of Arab eloquence. That's the only thing they had to show as a way of a civilizational achievement. Their language, they had achieved a remarkable talent in writing Arabic to such a high level, using such confined poetic meters that forced them to improvise and use very, very rare words, which kept poetry at a very high level. And it made sense in part of Allah's great scheme, because when the Qur'an was revealed, things are known by their opposites. Had poetry not been available to the Arabs, then when the Qur'an came, okay, what does this mean? When you and I read the Qur'an today, we just see some verses that look like poetry, and we're like, okay, where is the speciality in this? It doesn't sound that beautiful to us. It doesn't sound inspiring to us. Sometimes you can have poetry that really hits deep, whereas if you read the Qur'an, I doubt anything in the Qur'an will really hit deep like poetry. So had the Qur'an come in a blank canvas, as everybody likes to use, blank canvas, we wouldn't have known the eloquence of the Qur'an. But the things are known by their opposites. So because we know poetry, then we can look at the Qur'an and say, oh wow, this is a bit similar, but it differs here. Actually, this is not in the genre of pre-Islamic poetry, but it sounds like poetry, and its conventions are somewhat different. What's going on here? So it forces the Arabs to think about the Quran, and then when they look at the Quran and they compare it to poetry, especially the educated elites and the poets, they're gobsmacked, thinking, oh my God, what's happened here? This is something so extraordinary and so unique at the same time. But it's not poetry, but it surpasses what poetry is supposed to do. So this is part of Allah's great scheme, that Allah used language and the preservation of language and the refining of language through poetry. And then right at the end of that period, the Qur'an was revealed. And these 7 poems were considered the pinnacle of Arab eloquence at that time. We're going to have a look at some of them today, and we're going to compare them to some Western poetry just to know what all the fuss is about. Especially madrasa students and madrasa students of the Arabic language. Some madrasa students excel in the Arabic language, and a lot of them as part of their, well, not a lot of them, but I have seen some of them as part of their Arabic teaching curriculums. Remember we mentioned the problem with Arabic curriculums in the last lecture. What they do is then they put poetry in there as well. So not only is the poor person struggling to learn Arabic because you've just dumped grammar on him, and a grammar that's very unique and different from English, you're making the poor guy look at Arab poetry, which most normal Arabs cannot translate. And if they did, just like the Qur'an, they would only get surface level meanings of them. So this is a great injustice done to people. And I don't know, I personally believe that those people that are promulgating pre-Islamic poetry today and saying, wow, 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 they're not saying wow because of the level of the Arabic, they're saying wow because of the meanings, which lends credence for me to believe that they haven't read any other poetry from any other genre anywhere else in the world. Because had they read proper poetry, Assalamu alaikum, Alex, welcome. Had they been versed in poetry from across the world, they wouldn't be looking at the meanings and messages of pre-Islamic poetry and be saying, wow. Pre-Islamic poetry wasn't saved for its meanings and its wow factor. It was saved for its obscure Arabic wow factor. That's the only reason why it was saved. Right. So let's have a look and delve a bit deeper. Okay, what are the mu'allaqat? Okay, we know this. These are the 7 famous poets. The thing is that nothing is set in stone. This is why we have to call a spade a spade. We have to call out what's nonsense, and we have to challenge the old narrative. If you're in a madrasa system and people are teaching you stuff like this, you have to say, wait a minute. You have to ask them these questions. And one of the questions you need to ask them is, can you please get the list of the 7 that are supposed to be hanging in the Kaaba first? Because there's no one agreed upon list. Then ask them, if this is the pinnacle of Arabic writing, why is it that people had differences in agreeing who was number 1, who was number 2, and differences in who they should put there? But apparently it was hanging in the Kaaba. So if it was hanging in the Kaaba, then you should have the evidence for it. If you haven't got the evidence for it, then it wasn't hanging in the Kaaba, and the evidence we use is if it was hanging in the Kaaba, it would have been mentioned in the Sīrah. The Sīrah is a in-depth, the Sīrah points to Rasulullah as much as the Sīrah points to everything around the Sīrah. This is what I keep mentioning, that if you want to know Rasulullah, the Sīrah isn't the best literature to know Rasulullah. You have to look in the Shama'il and the Khasa'is, which we mentioned in the very, very first lesson, if you don't remember. The Sīrah is an overview, and the Sīrah looks at Rasulullah just as much as the companions, just as much as the environs and the culture of those people, and to a lesser degree, the actions of the pagans. So you would assume that the mu'allaqat would have been mentioned in the Sīrah, but yet they are not. So alarm bells start ringing straight away. It's just basically Arab exaggeration. Poetry is exaggerated, and everything around poetry is going to be exaggerated. So, this poem and feigning faint and 100 camels as rewards and prestige and name and honor and being scared of them and not wanting to upset them, and they also have secret jinnis with them that give them the words, and oh yes, it was hung in the Kaaba printed in gold. Right? We're talking about people that couldn't read and write for the most part, and they're going to hang up poems that don't really concern 99% of the population for the reason they were hung up. It's just nonsense. You have to challenge these things, and you're going to get a lot of stick for this, just like I get. But that's what you have to break. You've educated yourself on the Seerah, and some of you've educated yourself in the Islamic sciences. So you have the power now to take it forward in your own lives. When you teach it, you need to break these old silly narratives. One thing that I mentioned in the beginning elsewhere is that in the past it's okay. You can tell most Muslims in the Muslim world are not educated. Literacy levels are very low. You can give them any story, they'll believe it. But today, when Orientalists sieve through your literature, today when we have YouTube guys exposing you, YouTubers trying to expose you, influencers trying to expose you, they will pick up at every small thing. Today you are no longer in the position where you say, okay, no problem, akhbar, this and that and everything. How many bad akhbar have been taken up by Orientalists on YouTube, and they're throwing it back at Muslims? Oh, Rasul had got hold of a Jew, and because the Jew didn't reveal his hoard of gold, Rasul had a fire made on his chest. This is written in Sīrah literature. So if we're going to follow the Sīrah literature blindly, then it's written in the Sīrah literature, and when a non-Muslim picks it up, how will you defend it? But if you know Sīrah literature properly, then you can say, no, that story is rubbish because of A, B, and C, and extra bonus because of D. Likewise, when they're going to, you should be an expert. Today's time is no longer today's age is no longer the age where you can say, oh, well, I know this 80%. No, you need to know everything you do 100%, because the non-Muslims, in the eye of the camera, the internet, across the whole world, will pick points in your narrative. And just like we like to bash them and pick points in their narratives and make them look silly on screen, many times you've seen that in debates, and we relish in these debates at watching them look silly, which isn't really what debating means. Allah says, debate with them in the best of ways. In the best of ways does not mean that you put them down. They also do the same thing to you, and there's many people that are going to be relishing that. And we can put them down based on evidence we have and a lack of evidence they have. They put us down based on evidence that we hold. And if you don't know how true or untrue the evidence is, you're gone. You've lost the argument, and many people have turned away from Islam who are watching that debate. Likewise with your ulama. The ulama like to keep teaching the same nonsense again and again. You need to put a stop to it and say, well, this isn't true about the mu'allaka. No poet had his mu'allaka hanging, his main ode, qasida, hanging in the Kaaba. For A, B, C, and D as a bonus, here's the reasons why. And they won't believe you, you'll get pushback. But who cares? You have your own narrative to play in life, and they have their own. And eventually, with enough voices stepping away from this old way of learning without thinking, you will make a change, inshallah. I was discussing with Brother Ibrahim today in private how most Seerah books have the story of Rasulullah's suicide in there. Could you then support those writers or scholars and say, yeah, we're with you, we're going to push your narrative? You mentioned this story, and you probably mentioned half a dozen other crazy stories. I'm with you, man. I'm not going to go against my madrasa system. No, you are educated now. You have to go against what goes against the grain of Islamic theology. We have to look at the stories of Rasulullah through a theological lens. You will find stories that are ahad. They are sound narrations, like Rasulullah going to the grave of his mother and asking for permission to pray. How do we interpret that? Why would he ask permission to? There's problems with that. We'll get there when we get into the Seerah. I don't want to give you all the secrets just yet. But there's many stories. How do you answer those? Rasulullah exposing his nakedness when he was young. Rasulullah wanting to go to town and see what the fuss was about, and he sat in a wedding party. These narrations are there. Some of them are sound narrations. But then this is where you bring your Islamic sciences into it and say, well, we don't believe in these narrations because of A, B, C, and here's the bonus D reason. You can't just be blind and say, okay, this is a narration, so it's there. What happened to your madrasa training? What happened to all your critiquing skills of sieving through a hadith and finding out just because it's sound, who said it's sound and who said it's not sound? And even though it's sound, why we cannot use it? Because based on theological reasons, we cannot use such a hadith that end up putting some blemish on the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Part of our theology is our Prophet is perfect. So it doesn't matter if you now find a Sahih hadith that everybody believes is Sahih and the chains of narration say they are Sahih. If it goes against the shan of the lofty characteristics of the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, we don't believe them. So these are all part of the Seerah genre that needs to be learned, and this is why I pity those people that are told read when the moon split. You know, a huge disservice is done to Seerah, as if that's all the Seerah was. What about your deep love for Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam? How often do you lot cry when you mention the name of Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam? How often do you cry when you hear his story? How often do you cry when you hear the stories of the Ahlul Bayt? Do you know of people in the past that literally mentioned his name and died? Imam Jazuli, who has heard of Ad-Dalalul Khairat? Who's heard of that book?
I have Ustad.
Have you read it?
No.
Okay. After the Qur'an, what's the most read book in existence? Most make a mistake here. Don't say Ad-Dalalul Khairat. What's the most read book after the Qur'an in the Muslim Ummah?
I guess it would be the biography.
Nope. Okay, most people would say Bukhari, right? Most people would say Bukhari, but Bukhari is a book for the ulama. And the majority of the Muslims even today cannot read and write, let alone 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago. The most read book in the Muslim Ummah after the Quran is books on salawat. So Ad-Dalalul Khairat was a book that was spread out throughout the Muslim Ummah. Today, due to a weakening of Islamic knowledge, we don't know it. This book is world famous. The author, he died of a broken heart for Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. What do we know of dying of broken hearts? Literally dying of broken hearts today. We don't. But you will only know if you gain some of his hal, some of his spiritual station. One of my students here mentioned to me, she said, I haven't read many spiritual books, so I was told to read them in madrasa, but I didn't read them, and now I know I'm lacking. Spirituality is not read through books. You're taking the aura, you're taking the hal, the spiritual state of your teacher through time and space. It doesn't come from books. Just like you cannot read Bukhari and understand hadith, just like you can't read a fiqh book and understand fiqh properly, you cannot read spirituality. The language needs unpacking, and one line is explained in a 1-hour lecture. But spirituality is totally lacking in our madaris. Why is it lacking? There's many reasons. Some of them political. We're not going to go down that road. But where is the spiritual connection of you with Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam? Your madrasa was lacking. The main thing they never taught you. If you're not infusing your sciences with the love of Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, you're going to become very harsh when you give fatwa. This is the reason why we have crazy fatwa against women. This is the reason why we have silly YouTubers coming out with stupid responses and belittling people like Sheikh Hamza Yusuf. That these people are deviants. Why? Because they've just read 2 pages of a specific book somewhere, and then now they know it properly, and Sheikh Hamza Yusuf doesn't. I have a good mind to give the name of this YouTuber, but I'm not. This only happens because there's something critically missing in their education. Number one, a lot is missing in that YouTuber. He doesn't have an Islamic education, and what he thinks he has is he's skewed. But number two, it's the spiritual aspect of it. Why do the Taliban give harsh fatwa? Why do the people in the madaris of India give harsh fatwa, of Pakistan give harsh fatwa? They're lacking spirituality. When they speak to you, why is it that they're aggressive? When they speak to you, why are they forceful? When they speak to you, why are their faces grimacing? And when they speak to you, why is it that they talk down to you? All four things, you, everybody will vouch and say, yes, this is how they are. Why is that? Because the spiritual component is severely missing. When you ask them, go to those ulama and say, please give me a book in Arabic on manners in Islam, or chivalry, fatuwa, maruwa, those kind of things. I tell you now, and I've tried this, they won't know one single book. They have not studied those books in their madaris. That's the reason why they're ugly to look at. That's the reason why they've got pot bellies. That's the reason why they talk down upon you. Go to a classically educated person. Look at Hamza Yusuf. Look at Abdul Hakim Murad. I'm just giving you those two names. There's a plethora of others. Yahya Rodas and many, many others. Look at how they are. You don't see them ugly. You don't see them forceful. You don't see them aggressive. You don't see them harsh. They're called liberals. They're not liberals. They're just traditional Muslims. But they are the ones who talk to you most about love. They are the ones who talk to you about manners and things that you've never heard of. They'll mention books like Ad-Dalal al-Khairat, Al-Qasidat al-Burda and stuff like that. Other people won't. Do you want to end up like a harsh, knit-eyed mullah, or do you want to end up like a soft-spoken Abdul Hakim Murad, who is a very rarefied person? You know, you could compare him to some of these poets in his rarefied nature, the way he speaks, the way he articulates. You could compare him to Shakespeare even. You know, that for me is a wali of God. And if you follow him, you'll also realize that in Muharram, he will write odes to Imam Hussein and sing them. And if you saw that, you'd all gasp and, oh my God, is he Shia? What nonsense. Just because you weren't taught the love of the Ahlul Bayt in your madaris, you are lacking. It's nothing to do with the Sunnis that know exactly what to do in Muharram. I spend 10 days every Muharram inside the mosque. We learn about Imam Hussein. Sunnis, unfortunately, are not taught about love of Rasulullah or love of the Ahlul Bayt. And when they all see a Sunni do it, there's labels of Shia. What a shame. What a shame. So we should tie ourselves to traditional classical scholarship, and any narrative that's away from the love of Rasulullah, the love of his family, or correct understanding of the religion, you have to put a stop to it. You have to go back to your ulama and say, well, thank you for graduating me. I'm now equipped with the tools, some of the tools actually, but don't say some of the tools to them. Say, I've now been equipped with the tools and I've gone out into the world and used those tools, and this is what's come out. And it's going against what you taught us. So can you please reconcile? And this is where they'll have problems. And this is where then you have to force them in a nice way and say, well, I think you should change your opinions about these things now. Such as, what am I talking about? Certain Sīrah stories. The fact that they say Rasulullah's family is in the hellfire. The fact that they accuse him of committing suicide. The fact that these 7 poets were so good that their poetry was in the Kaaba. That's a massive claim to say that. Right? Lewd poetry in the Kaaba? Really? And don't worry about the kickback. The ones who give you kickback are people of no worth. They'll peter out. It's only people in their 20s that like to watch YouTube and like to follow shayukh. By the time they're in their 30s, they're too busy with their families. By the time they're in their 40s, they've got pouches, and their religion as study time has been over 20 years, and they will never start studying now. They will never ever start studying now. So don't worry about that. Yeah, but hopefully you lot will carry on studying for the rest of your life, because that's the path you lot chose. Even if you take on a desk job, you'll still carry on studying the deen. So those people who are your haters are going to die, but you're still going to remain in the market. Will you repeat the same old narrative, or will you set a new narrative? and force people to adopt it and change. Okay, enough of that. So Imam Jazuli's book, Ad-Dalal al-Khairat, that's what you need to read to instill love. Qasidatul Burda, what were you not taught? Madrasa girls, what were you taught about Qasida Burda? Hello?
I don't know if I don't recall there being a time where we were like sat down and taught it, but it would be recited on Fridays, for example. Yeah, as in there would be like a element of importance that would be given to it, but
Alhamdulillah,
there wasn't much explanation.
at least it is recited because many madaris, especially of the Deobandi orientation, would say that there is shirk in Qasida and Burda. Nobody told you there was elements of shirk in there?
No, not from the teachers, but I feel like I went through that phase at one point, as in I just found it a bit strange. When people have their like Salafi days, I did have that period of time where I personally found it odd, but yeah.
There's a lot of things in Islamic literature that are there and we're not taught them, so we find these things odd. But these things there's nothing odd about these things. We stick with the mainstream and inshallah you'll be guided. And in 10 years time you'll see when everybody else peters out, you'll be shining. You'll be that one person shining and doing what you intended originally to do. And inshallah may Allah guide all of you to this, inshallah. Okay, so these are the 7 or supposedly 10. They can't get their stories right. Mu'allaqas. Of the 125 poets or so whose poetry have survived, less than a quarter enjoy reputation. This rests by and large on a few long odes they performed. Others have showed great merit, they've receded into the background. All of this merit, you're thinking is, wow, what kind of poetry will this be? Where is it? I just want to get hold of it. I just want to read it. I want to be inspired. There's nothing inspiring about it. Nothing whatsoever inspiring about their poetry. Very few of their poetry is inspiring, and it's inspiring if you're inclined that way. So if you're inclined by the religious idea of the passing of time, then 1 or 2 of their poems that mention that will pull at your heartstrings. If you're inclined towards, if you've just broken up with a girl, 1 or 2 of those lines may incline you. Apart from that, the rest of it is worthless, totally worthless. It's just there for its Arabic, that's it. So these are the names, we looked at them: Imrul Qais, Labid, Tarafa, Zuhair ibn Abi Sulma, Antara ibn Shaddad, Amir ibn Kalthum, Harith ibn Hiliza, and then there's actually 3 more. Al-Nabigha, he's very famous, very, very famous. Al-Ashab, very famous. Abid ibn al-Abras, very famous. So really, I would include them there as well. Not that my value counts for much, but if my value did count, I would include them as well. But then so much for there being 7. Some have included them. So there's no agreement, but it's generally believed that Imrul Qais is preeminent. Many people of the centuries have tried to make rankings. Some will say this is number 1, this is number 2, this is number 3, but all of that is subjective. It's very hard to say one is better than the other. But Imrul Qais de facto is believed to be the greatest, and from the poetry that I've read, something about his poetry touches me because he uses in his nasab, which we'll talk about what that is, his opening, he uses a theme that I really like because it's kind of the idea set in there is many of my own poetry is kind of set to the same idea, but his reason for doing it is very different from my reason for doing it. But because the words are the same, I can kind of derive a feeling, a non-existent feeling, right? It's the feeling you make for yourself. So he didn't intend that. I doubt if he intended that, but I just take that meaning and intend it for myself, and it fits nicely with my own stuff. And that's exactly what I'm going to get you to write, inshallah, for next week as well, for the week after next, inshallah. So there's no set factor on what made poets preeminent. We mentioned that some of it was down to the delight of the critic. They never had panels They never had judge panels and international forums back then. If you were somebody of repute, you could say, oh yeah, Sarafa was number one. And people would say, oh, you said it. Wow, he said it, so it must be. That's how it went. Also, due to tribal links, if the critic belonged to a specific tribe, then of course he's going to boost his own person up. Corruption did exist, and on seeking reward from the tribe. So if you're a mawla of a particular tribe, or you're linked to that tribe somehow, you're going to want to boost that tribe up as way of politics and seeking reward also. So Imrul case, his story is the most interesting for me. The other ones, there's not much information there, and the information that was there, I didn't really put too much down because it's boring for us. But his story is a bit interesting. So if we look at his story, I'll do his, and then the boring ones you lot can read. So he was the most celebrated part of Jahiliyyah. Rasul had condemned him to hell. If you read the Aqidah book if you read Imam Sawi's commentary on Jawharat al-Tawheed, Jawhara. If you read, he even mentions that these two, him, Imr al-Qais, and Hatim al-Tayyib, if I'm not mistaken, were condemned to hell by the lips of Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So I need to know the reason why, because we do know that anybody coming before Islam, before Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, will be pardoned. Did the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam mean he is condemned to hell because of the lewdness and what he did with his poetry and how he led his life, his immoral life? Did he mean that? Or there's a permanent, for everlasting condemnation of him? I believe it's the former, but this is something that I need to ask my teachers. So Imr al-Qais, Jundub bin Hujr al-Kindi. What do we know about the Kinda tribe, everybody? Now, everything that we've taught, many of the stuff is going to come out, and many of those the lesser known kingdoms that we spoke about are going to come out. And I did tell you that things will come out later on as well. So Kinda, what do we know about the Kinda? You can just tell me in one line. Okay, so the Kinda was a massive confederation of true kings. They made themselves as kings. Okay, south. Yep, they were in the south because of their links with the Tubbas of Himyar. And Saba. They were crowned kings, so they kept those royal titles. They were at war with the kings of Al-Hira. So two powerful kingdoms at war with each other. And he was a scion of that tribe. So he was the younger son of Hujr bin al-Harith, who ruled over the Asad and Ghatafan tribes. His mother was a sister of the famous Tughlabid Arab chiefs Qulayb and Muhail. Tughlab is up way in the north. So next to the Luqmites, somewhere you'll find this particular ruling kingdom up in the north. He grew up writing poetry, which was considered below his station. So he was a prince. Princes don't write poetry. Just like 100 years ago, women didn't write poetry, and women weren't even allowed to write stories. This was considered below his station. His father expelled him as a result. He didn't stop. His father expelled him, though there are many stories, most likely due to his connection with a common woman of the Udra tribe named Fatima and his poems for her. He became a wanderer and an adventurer. So him and his friends, they probably had some money, or even if they didn't, you didn't really need money. They would travel from watering hole to watering hole. In our language today, watering hole would be pub to pub, diner to diner. Back then, literally watering hole to watering hole, and that's where they'd get their pub stuff as well. That's where they'd get their drink as well. So they would be there for like a week or two, party and move on. It's like what you see in the movies when people just move from place to place. They would spend like a time there partying with the elites because he was a prince and his friends were probably noblemen as well. And then they would carry on, probably riffraff as well. Then all of a sudden his father was killed by the Azd. When his father was killed, he made a very famous statement. His statement was, "Father wasted me when I was young. Now that I am grown up, he has imposed on me the duty of his revenge. Today wine, tomorrow business. This is a famous quote from him. And he went on a bender apparently, lasted a while, and then he said, "That's it. Now let's do this." So he took up a vow. This is what Arabs did. So now with pre-Islamic poetry, we're moving into Jahiliyyah, right? So the next lesson after this, when this lesson finishes, it'll carry on for another week or two, and then we hit Jahiliyyah. And poetry and Jahiliyyah is a crossover, right? So now you'll start to see things come up which you should question, by the way, that are you're thinking is complete Jahiliyyah. So this comes up in the Sīrah as well, where one of the companions of Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, his mum refused to wash her hair, refused to do anything if her son didn't renounce his religion or whatnot. Another story is one of the wives who was separated. The husband went to Mecca, the son was Medina, the son was separated. She ended up pitching camp for 1 year in the desert, 1 year outside Mecca, and for 1 year she suffered. And then the Meccans finally had some remorse, and they let her go back to her husband, I think it was, and then they kept the baby. I can't remember the exact story, but we touch upon it in the Seerah. There's another story of Abu Sufyan. When he lost the war, he pledged that he will kill 100 people, or he will not wash himself and not oil his head and not comb himself and not wash himself unless he has killed someone. So he took revenge by just setting off on a small guerrilla band, and they ended up killing one person, but killing that one person was enough for him to say, "I fulfilled my vow." Right? So now Imrul Qais is saying the same thing. He took up a vow not to drink wine, eat flesh, oil his hair, play any game until he had avenged his father by killing 100 notables of the Asad and cutting 100 forelocks of another 100. Right? So this is all Jahiliyyah now. A lot of their poetry is praising Jahiliyyah. What is Jahiliyyah? You'll start to learn from today, inshallah. He returned from Yemen to prepare for revenge. The Asad offered him kill for a kill, blood money, or war. So the Asad realized now we're going to war. The Asad tribe was a tribe that was under the sway of the Kindites. But the Asad tribe wanted to be free, so they got rid of his father. And now we see blood vengeance. So they're saying, okay, let's not go to war. We killed your father, you kill one of our people, right? This is Jahiliyyah now. And this is the same, in the same breath, I'm going to say Pashtuns here. I'm not going to say Afghanistan, I'm going to say Pashtuns, because the Tajiks and the Hazara and the Uzbeks take this particular aspect of Jahiliyyah slightly less than the Pashtuns do. Right? They're not so crazy about it as the Pashtuns are, even though they're all Afghans and they're all crazy somewhat in their ways, but they're not as crazy as the Pashtuns when it comes to what's the Pashtun word for it? It just evades me. What is it called? Blood for blood? What's it called, Rumaisa?
I can't seem to remember at this moment, but Aisha might know.
Is that Namang or something? Nang.
I think Nang and Namus is more for like honor. It's more to do with honor.
Right, okay. The Yemenis also have a similar thing. When I lived in Saudi, I learned a few of these ideas that the Yemenites have also, right? And they're pretty tribal and they have similar tribal customs as the Pashtuns do. So this is what he had to do. So when you've made this promise, you have to carry it out. The Arabs were known for not breaking their promises. So when in anger, when you do these things, these are life-changing events. So they said, listen, dude, take one of ours, forget the 100, take one of ours, let's not go to war. We'll give you somebody you can kill, blood for blood, it's fine. Or take blood money. We all know blood money, it's in the Afghan culture as well, and it's in the Arab culture, blood money. Or if you don't want to accept these two terms, then we'll go to war. He said, bring it on, let's go to war. So with the help of the Taghlib, these are tribe names. Now try to remember these tribe names. It's because after Jahiliyyah, when we do start Sīrah proper, we're going to spend a few weeks on Arab tribes. We're going to spend time on learning connections, and we're going to learn the ancestors of Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam in detail, deeper seerah, remember? So we're going into all of this, not just for the hell of it. We're going, some of it is boring, but you did sign up for a deeper seerah course. So at least tomorrow, when you learn any other seerah, nothing new will come up. You know, you looked at everything that's to do with Arabia, and nobody will tell you anything, you know, untoward. And once it's covered, it's covered. You know, normal people touch on it just in one lecture. They'll touch on Jahiliyyah, they'll touch on poetry, they'll touch on the tribes, and it's done. But me, I want to take it into more time. So try to remember these names, right? These names are going to come up again and again now. So from now on, forget the religion, forget paganism, forget trade, forget all of that. We're now transitioning into Sīrah. So bang in the middle is Jahiliyyah, which is now we're just on the surfaces, on the outskirts of Jahiliyyah with the poetry, and then we'll be firmly in Jahiliyyah when we do the lecture on Jahiliyyah, and then on the other side we'll come out with the ancestors of all of these tribes. So these tribal names, try to remember now. So the Asad offered him this. He, with the help of the Taghlib and Bakr, raided the Asad, killed many of them. So he took his revenge. He wanted to pursue them and kill more of them, but his allies said, no, it's done. No more, it's done. And he said, no. He went on a sick bender and said, no, I want revenge, I want this, I want that. So they said, listen, see you later. We did our job. We're not going to do any more. We don't want problems for ourselves in the future. They refused and they deserted him. So you can already see he was someone that lived life on the edge. He had probably somewhat, on the surface of it, a sad time in the desert. He loved it. But if you look at it from the outside, you're going to say, well, his father kicked him out. He lived alone. He was a royal prince, but he lived alone for a long time, just drinking with idiots. And then he has to take revenge now, but he's actually, where is he getting his armies from? His own people, you know, are not enough. What happened to the powerful Kinda? He's now having to take help from outsiders who are also deserting him. So then he set off. You need to bear this in mind about Imrul Qais, right? Then this is what makes his poetry more amazing when you look at his life story and then compare it to his poetry. So he sets out to Yemen to get 1,500 more troops. On the way back, he manages to secure some troops. On his back, he passed by the shrine of Dhul Khalasa. Who is Dhul Khalasa? Have you forgotten your pre-Islamic gods from Ibn Kalbi's readings? Yep, excellent Shahid. Shahid's on the road today. Right, so Dhul Khalasa was a deity. We mentioned her or him in the previous lecture. We even read about it. You lot did the reading actually. So he thought, okay, let's find out if this God is in my favor as well. Because my boys are telling me I shouldn't do this. I don't know whether it's right or wrong. Is it in accordance with our culture, our jahiliyyah, our the way we function? Let me ask the God. So he got 3 arrows, divining arrows, and he used them to divine if the idol favored his revenge. Each time he reshuffled the arrows, the result was the same. His God was not interested. He was told by his God, no, don't do this. So he got no, he did it again, he got no, he did it again, he got no. Finally, he got so sick that he broke the arrows and flung them at the face of the idol and said, woe betide you, if your father had been killed, you would not have refused me permission to take revenge. Sorry about my spellings here. Let me just correct them as we speak. So this is how silly it looked. So you're slapping your God in the face and you're saying, if it was your family, you would never have refused me permission. But because you don't know what pain is, you're telling me no. So then he went off on his own to fulfill his vow. Now, most people would have got superstitious here, but he didn't care. You know, it was like, whatever to my God, I'm going to do what I have to do. So at that time, there existed political enmity between the king of Al-Hira. Where is Al-Hira, everybody? Come on, don't tell me you're gonna get a comprehensive exam at the end of pre-Seerah. Where is Al-Hira? Nobody knows? Okay, Al-Hira is the kingdom, is the famous capital of poetry. It was the capital of the Lukhmites in Mesopotamia. Well done, Shahid. In Mesopotamia, next to the city of Baghdad, if I'm not mistaken. Where Baghdad stands today, this city is not far from there. Al-Hira is a famous city. And you'll hear this now. You'll hear this city mentioned a lot from now on. And you'll hear about the Lukhmites and the Ghassanids. Do you remember I said to you, remember these names? They're going to start featuring, but they're not featuring when we studied the bigger picture of Syria and Iran and Iraq. But they will start featuring now, because now we're looking more Arab now. We're moving away from the Romans and the Persians, and now we're getting more concentrated on just the Arabs. So, and these names, Mundir, and these names are very famous names. So there was enmity between the Kinda and the Lukhmites, right? So Mundir and Imr al-Qais's father, the king of Kinda, both powerful kingdoms, and there was enmity between them. So after Hujr, Imr al-Qais became the target for Mundir. So because there was always enmity and they had power bases, they're not so easily going to go to war. But Imr al-Qais, don't forget now, has lost his kingdom. He's on his own, and now's the best time for Al-Mundir to wipe him out. Right? Once you've wiped out this last scion of the Kinda tribe, that's it. They're never going to be in a position to harass you again. They're going to fragment into their own tribal confederations, and that's it. Divide and conquer kind of thing. Hujr had other sons, but it was only Imr al-Qais that decided to take revenge for his father. So backed by the Persian emperor. Why the Persian emperor? Because remember I told you it was the Persians that set these guys up, and it was the Romans that set the Ghassasina, the Ghassanids, up in Syria. So backed by the Persian emperor, Al-Mundir sent an army to seize Imr al-Qais. At this point, everybody left him. So all of these people that were with him, thinking we cannot fight against the armed backing of the Persian emperor and Al-Hira anyway. So he's now on his own. So he's just basically got his family and some retainers, and he's on his own now. He fled with only a few loyal supporters and families, seeking refuge in a number of influential northwest Arabian tribes. So he's moving more and more closer towards the Ghassanids. His northwest Arabia is the Hijaz. You should know the map by now. So he ends up at Taima. We know where Taima is. He came to a Jew. We know Taima of the Jews. We read it in the inscriptions. The whole area was populated by Jews. It features in the Sīrah as well. He came to a Jew on the Medina-Damascus highway called Al-Samuel. Samiel. Remember these names? These names were different names, not Arabized, and they became Arabized later. The owner of the famous black and white fort, Ablaq. We know that the Jews had forts there. It'll feature in the Sīrah. And Al-Ablaq is a kind of architectural style that you'll see in Syria. You'll see it. If you look at the mosques in Syria, you'll see there's bands, this black band, yellow band, black band, yellow band. That style of architecture is called Ablaq. And this Jew had Ablaq paneling on his fort, and here is the fort today. Supposedly this is that same fort. This is what survives of that fort from the time of Imr al-Qais. So through a recommendatory letter to the Ghassanid king Al-Harith, so this Jew is quite influential, and we did mention that the Jews were very influential in that area. If they're bold enough to say Taima of the Jews, that means they must have held some power. And we know that they were headmen and mayors in some of the villages and towns they were in, so they had influence. So obviously this Jew had influence, and he sent a letter to the Ghassanid king Al-Harith saying, Imr al-Qais is coming to see you, and he wants you to give him a letter to send him forward to the Emperor Justinian at Constantinople in 530 AD. Look at the dates. Remember these dates now. All of the poets were a generation before Rasulullah. Both were old enemies of the king Al-Hira. We knew that the Ghassanids were at war with the reason I'm speaking like this is I'm just reinforcing stuff for you now. Okay, I'm reinforcing the history because I know you've forgotten it. So they were at war with the Lukhmites and the Persians. The Romans and the Ghassanids were the enemies of the Lukhmites and the Persians. So after listening to Imrul Qais's panegyric, this is a petitioning poem. This is a poem that you recite for the king, right? And this is what they would do. They would go and write poems to the king, wanting to elicit favor. So he recited this poem and his petition to help him against the Lukhmites. He sent them back. So so the Justinian sent it back with a force. However, this is where it goes wrong for Imrul Qais. Imrul Qais died on the way back due to a skin disease. Now, there are two stories of why he died. One story is that he died of a natural skin disease, which we believe is the most plausible reason because it's mentioned in his poetry. But the more romantic reason of why he died, because this was Imrul Qais, and Imrul Qais is the big player, even though he was in his 70s at this time. But while he was at the court of the Roman emperor, he couldn't help himself, and he made advances to one of the ladies of the court, either the sister of Imrul Qais or of Justinian, or the wife or his daughter, something like this. So once the king found out, the king sent a robe covered in poison, a robe of honor, and he told him to wear it. Imrul Qais wore this robe, and as a result of the poison, he died. Thus ends the life of Imrul Qais, who is said to have lived for more than 80 years. A life full of adventure, a life full of fighting and running and playing and drinking and writing poetry, a life that many of the youth of Arabia would love to have held. You know, being a king is romantic enough that you're a prince in exile and you're running from you're basically being chased by world empires at that time, and you're left totally alone. But despite all of that, lesser men would have been broken. You can read in his poetry exactly how he lived, and it's the exact opposite of what you would be thinking that he was doing, running here and there and living in sadness and whatever. Despite never being able to recover his father's kingdom and suffering extreme hardships and discouragement, his challenging spirit never gave way, and he never ceased to strive for his goal. The bulk of his poetry relates to his own experiences, his romantic escapades, desert journeys, and game excursions. So all of his poetry relates to this kind of stuff. Remember these themes now, okay? Boasting about yourself, he didn't do that, but others did. Boasting about yourself, romantic escapades, real or imagined, desert journeys, and game excursions. Hardly the stuff of inspiration, right? There's one poem of his I like. It's to do with the wolf. It's basically he hears the wolf howling at night time. I need to find that poem and show you lot. And he says, "You and I both are alone. Yani you're alone as a wolf and I'm alone as a person, and our journey is the same. And two people who are alone find company in each other, and then they feel like they're no longer alone." That poem for me was a nice poem because it didn't mention any of the other stuff that their poems do mention, and it has a meaning behind it also. A few short pieces are in praise of benefactors and condemnation of enemies. This is a theme that you'll find in all pre-Islamic poetry. Women occupy a considerable part of his poetry, but wine none. So wine didn't play a part in his poetry, and which makes people question how much of a drunkard was he. Wise sayings, maxims, complaints of time, glorification of himself or ancestors, themes so common in pre-Islamic poetry are wanting. So you're not going to get many wise sayings, maxims, or complaints of time. And you'd think the opposite. He would glorify himself, but he didn't. But he didn't do any of the good stuff as well. A note of robust optimism to the passion of adventure runs through his poetry. So even though he's suffering privations and hardship, adventure runs through his poetry with gusto. His language is sonorous, his end rhymes bombastic, style delightful and vigorous. This is Imrul Qais. His Mu'allaka, which consists of 81 lines, is a combination of several isolated episodes. Over half of his Mu'allaka of 81 lines is taken up with interesting references to feminine beauty or romance with dames. So this is supposedly in the Kaaba, right? This is what the Arab poets go doolally about. And half of it is taken up with interesting references of feminine beauty, of romance with dames. This is followed by a challenging but novel description of a very dark, long night. 4 lines. Then he turns to the celebration of his horse, its speed, its endurance. 18 lines. That's 3/4. That's done. Just 20% left now. The ode comes to a close with the portrayal of an exceptionally heavy shower and the devastating flood which it causes. 8 lines. Right. So this is the famous mu'allaq of his, and nothing in there is of any merit apart from the language, the expressions, and the style it's written in. For me, the description of the dark long night would be of interest. And the thing is that when you read the translation in English, you're catching nothing. You're not catching one thing of it, right? The select words in Arabic is what you need to read. And the Arabic language is so rich that the choice of words, it just gives you wonderful expression that other words don't give. And you're limited to use those words anyway because they have to match because of the style of poetry you're writing, which makes you find obscure words in the Arabic language. It just gets harder and harder, which is what makes the poets linguistically such marvels. That's it. Nothing about what's actually written in there. So this last bit about the ode comes to a close with the portrayal of an exceptionally heavy shower. I can relate to this. I've lived in Saudi Arabia. I know exactly what he's talking about here, and it's absolutely wonderful and beautiful. I would again like to see his definitions of this. And the way poetry is looked at is the same way as you look at the Qur'an. So for example, you look at a word in the Qur'an. Why did Allah choose this word? Allah chose this word, and then the Mufassirin will give you many, many, many reasons why Allah chose this word. Another word could have been used, but why Allah chose this word, and the deeper meanings and the slight nuances of this word over another word. The same thing can be done with the poetry. So why did he use certain words? Yes, he's described a heavy shower with a devastating flood. I've seen this millions of times in the English language. It's written. It evokes powerful imagery in my mind now, and it's stuff that I've seen and I've enjoyed. But what is he trying to portray in his words, choice of words? This is something that we need to look at. We, meaning we, but not that we're qualified, not that we would understand anything of what's going on, but why it was chosen, why his words were chosen as opposed to other words, and what is the deeper meaning of what he's really trying to say here. The next poet is Abid ibn al-Abras, 555. This is 20 years before us, 15 years before Rasulullah was born, right? He belonged to the tribe of Azd. I've not given their full names. I've just given what they're famous by, but their full names are longer. I didn't really find this topic interesting, so I wasn't bothered to really go deep into it. And it was boring actually for me. So he belonged to the tribe of Asad. So again, look, the same name comes up. The tribe of Asad, which was under the sway of Hujr. Hujr is who? The father of Imrul Qais. Right? So this poet also belonged to the same tribe. He belonged to the tribe that killed the father of Imrul Qais. He is said to have had hostile exchanges with Imrul Qais. When you start to read the details of these things, you have to start criticizing, and you realize a lot of this is just romantic exaggeration. Right? There's supposedly supposed to have been riddles being given to each other, and both of them had to complete. There's a lot of funny business when you read into these life stories. I just didn't quote it because I don't believe any of it's true, and we can barely come to an understanding of which poems are actually authentic. We don't even know. Most of them, we think that some of the poetry was written later by other people, and some was extended upon, and some of it we can know by a difference in style, some of it we can't know. So a lot of this is very ambiguous. So I didn't want to put ambiguous stories in. Deeper Sīrah means taking out these ambiguous stories, right? Many of the stories from the regular Sīrah, you will find that I won't use them. Maybe as a teaching aid, I'll put them in, but otherwise I won't put them in because I know that there's no reason for them to be there, and they're just superfluous and exaggerations, or if they're not exaggerations, they're going to be superfluous to our needs anyway. But that doesn't mean that myself, I'm not going to put in some akhbar that are not strong. I'm putting them in because they bolster the story. But I won't just put in anything. You'll notice that when I teach the Sīrah, inshallah. So this is this particular poet was hostile to Imrul Qais because his tribe had killed the father of Imrul Qais. Like Antara, did I spell Antara correctly here? Okay. Like Antara, he didn't produce poetry in his early life. So this poet didn't produce much poetry in his early life as opposed to Imrul Qais. The following are stories that cannot be authenticated. Abid's tribe paid Hujr the king tribute. Right? He was attached to Hujr as the latter's panegyrist, advisor, and a representative of his tribe. Asad held back tribute and were attacked by Hujr and expelled to the unhealthy Tihama. Tihama, as we know, I told you, it's the sea area, it's the Red Sea coast in the Hijaz area. Tihama is something, it's very, very difficult to live there. It's crazy humidity, it's madness. Really, it's madness. Without AC, whoa, I don't know how they survived there. And Prophet Muhammad in one of the accounts of his Sīrah, people never mentioned that he was standing in the Tihama area. So if he was standing in the Tihama area, that means he must have been sweating profusely, uncomfortable, and all the companions sweating profusely, wanting to get out of that zone. Right? They miss that part out when they talk about that in the Seerah. And really, you have to experience Tihama to know how bad that area is. So he was expelled to the Tihama. Abid wrote some poetry to Hujr asking for forgiveness and were allowed back to their lands. Abid, I think it is. They then killed Hujr, and thereafter Abid was an ardent defender of his tribe, which had suffered greatly under Hujr. So this is Jahiliya. Right? All of this stuff that we're talking about this is what people keep talking about when they're like the Arabs were Jahil. This is the stuff that was going on. I gave everybody a picture of some sort of civilizational stuff going on, right? We saw busy highways, we saw trade, we saw civilization, we saw gods, goddesses, religion, we saw writing, we saw monuments, we saw all of those things, which gave you an idea that, oh my God, these are kind of cool people, right? But yes, that was all true, what we read, and that did happen more than people who teach you Sīrah would like to have you believe it happened. But on the other side, this crazy stuff was going on with the Arabs. Not the Romans, not the Persians, but the Arabs themselves. They were living madness. They were living in some sort of Mad Max time. They then killed Hujr, and thereafter Abid was an ardent defender of his tribe. Fragments of poetry defying Imrul Qais, his threat survive, which would be nice to see, by the way, in the Arabic, original Arabic. Most of his poetry contains sad references to the suffering under Hujr and later Al-Harith at the Syrian border. Al-Harith was the Ghassanid king. His life was ended by Al-Mundir, the king of Al-Hira. One night, Al-Mundir killed two of his boon companions. So basically, Al-Mundir had two drinking companions. People back then, kings back then, you come across a lot of it in the Arabian Nights, where you have boon companions, right? You sit with them, you listen to dancing girls, you listen to poetry, you drink until you're drunk, and then you go sleep, and in the morning, it starts all over again. And one day, in a fit of anger, he must have been drunk, he killed his two best drinking companions. And he was very sorry after this, and he built two tombs over their graves, which is unique because Arabs wouldn't build tombs over their graves. So he did this out of love and, like regret for them. And he built two kind of statues, which are called, what's the name of them? Sepulchres. And he would visit them twice a year. And one day he would call the day of happiness, and the other one he'd call the day of misfortune. And what he did is, on the day of fortune, the first person that came to his court, he would give him 100 camels. And on the day of misfortune, he would cut off the head and paint the sepulchres with the blood. This seems like a complete exaggeration to me. And unfortunately, it was Abid who happened to be the first man to visit him on the day of misfortune. Right? Someone as famous as Abid would have probably survived, by the way. Yeah. So again, I believe this is Arab exaggeration. None of this is proof for any of this. His poetry. So what does his poetry consist of? He is a first-class poet, but with not a considerable amount, either forgotten or confused with other poets. In the 30 poems attributed to him, the majority contain preludes. These are the three-part composite Arab poem, we look at in detail what they are, right? So like a prelude, we'll have a look at what that is. It's a nasab, which is the starting of a poem, right? It's the opening of every single poem of the. They had a strange way of writing poetry. The only part of the poems that I really like are the nasibs because they resonate with my own poetry. Apart from that, I don't like the middle and the ending. So if the most of it is preludes, that means we don't really have complete poems for him. But what we do have is clear language with impressively long similes, which is what they had to do. They were limited in how they could describe things, and they had to use similes in their own language. So, for example, if I was Indian or Chinese and I write poetry, I could use a million things in my environment that would approximate what I'm trying to explain. The Arabs couldn't do that because they were in a featureless desert. So they have to use similes. Like, for example, if you're describing a girl, you'd probably say the eye of the gazelle. If you're trying to say the girl's face is like the eye of the gazelle. But then you want to get deeper into detail, and then you have to find another simile that has a slightly different nuance to it that gets you closer to the idea and then closer to the idea. They can't just do it with a gazelle. If a gazelle doesn't exist, they'll have to say a young born camel with shy eyes, with long eyelashes. And don't forget, all of this has to match the meters of their poetry. So in order to get these words, they need to use words that rhyme and fit into the meters of their poetry, which gets harder and harder. This is why the poems are so valued, by the way. Traditional poetry, all over the world, traditional poetry was free verse. People would write. In England, when we were taught poetry, we were always taught poetry in verse, poetry in verse. And because not all of us can write verse, it put us off poetry. I tried my best to write verse, I couldn't write verse. But when I went into free verse, boy, did I realize there was a hidden poet in me. So maybe you lot should try writing poetry that's away from free verse. All of these YouTube poets and these TikTok, Instagram poets and who publish books on Amazon, it's all free verse. And sorry to say, a lot of it is absolute garbage. They couldn't even beautify their language. They're writing in it's just like pop poetry. It's sickening. It's absolute sickening. So like what we've done to these arts today, right? We have pop songs that are no longer beautiful. We have pop stories. We have top shelf pop stories and the language is no longer beautiful. This is the reason why I can't read modern poetry and I can't read modern novels. The language is just so bland. The evocation is not non-existent. The same goes with the poetry. Whereas you have some authors that they write in a very sweet genre and it's vivid and you can't really place it in an exact timeline because they don't use modern bland language and even their poetry is beautiful. That kind of stuff I love to read. Otherwise, I'll just say the safest bet for me is just to pick up Victorian literature and Edwardian literature for its depth of expressiveness and writing and depth of ideas. But their poetry is very difficult. So try to write poetry, you'd surprise yourself. Write it in free verse. Most of the world wrote in free verse. But the Arabs didn't do that. They had strict conventions. And that means that not everybody could be a poet. And the ones who became exceptional. And I believe all of this was to showcase the Qur'an. All of this was really to showcase the Qur'an because only by opposites are things known. This is a maxim in the Islamic sciences. So, it's clear language with impressively long similes, vividly describes fearful storms and rainfalls. Again, look at the themes, the same themes, right? A lot of them borrowed from each other, by the way. And even if they didn't, what else would they write about? You have your camel, you have a girl, you have your drink, you have your tribal warfare, you have the desert, you have the night sky, you have rain and floods and the heat. That's all you have. There's not much to write about. Main topics are, again, look, camel journeys, youth, long journeys and ruined camps, celebrations of brave deeds, carouse and love, threats to Imr al-Qais, lamentations of disaster befalling his tribe at the hands of Hujr and the Ghassanid prince Al-Harith the Lame. He has a famous scene of an eagle chasing a fox. Pre-Islamic poetry have very nice hunting scenes, by the way. Tarafa bin al-Abd. Look at the date, 554 AD. These dates are approximations, by the way. the youngest mu'allaqat poet. He was born in the Persian Gulf island of Bahrain, which was under the dominion of the kings of Al-Hira. Again, look at that, Al-Hira. He was the nephew of a poet called Mutalammis. He was the nephew of a poet called Al-Mutalammis and the brother of the poetess Al-Khirnik. So this is quite a blessing and a virtue in their tribes to have this many poets, and especially in one family. You know, these families become formidable families if you have poets. And we look at the reasons why, inshallah, in once I get the mu'allaqat out the way, we'll discuss poetry in detail, inshallah. His father died while he was a child and he was raised by his uncles, but they didn't take good care of him. As a result, he grew up immoral and ill-mannered. He took up poetry very, very early in his life, but his upbringing made him a slanderer of men. So he was very young, right? He was very, very young. He's in his teens now. So he was reckless and ruthless, and he even slandered his own family, and he lost his life as a result. So Al-Mutalammis was attached to the court of Amr bin Hind, the king of Al-Hira. So any poet of any repute, you want to find a patron, you want to find a noble family, a rich family, because you make poems for them. You make poems for them and they pay you. That's how you survive. One modern example of how powerful poetry is still to the Arabs is the king of Jordan. I read this description somewhere by a journalist or somebody that visited King Hussein. King Hussein is the king of King Abdullah, the father of King Abdullah, the king of Jordan today. His father was the grandson of the Sharif of Mecca, grandson or something like that. He was a direct descendant, probably great. It wasn't a great grandson. I think he's a grandson, or his uncle, or something like this. Anyway, the Jordanians are basically, the Jordanian desert is an extension of the Saudi desert, right? Parts of Syria, Mesopotamia proper doesn't have the same culture. So half of Iraq and Syria, yes, they don't have that culture. Yes, Syria has a desert, and in the desert, like Deir ez-Zor, you will see that they look like dark-skinned. They don't look white like Syrians look. They actually look like Saudis. They have long hair. They look like Saudis. They wear the farwas. They're Bedouins. Likewise, in Iraq as well, in the south, they are completely like Bedouins, but elsewhere they're not. It's a different culture, Mesopotamia. What was I going to say? Jordan completely is Bedouinified, because it's basically an extension of the Saudi desert. They're just Bedouins. The Nabateans, Arabs, original Arabs, right? And even though there's Palestinians there now, the Palestinian flavor in Jordan is different from the Palestinian flavor in Palestine. They're all Shami people, Levantine people with a similar culture, but in Jordan they have aspects of Bedouin culture that have crept into the Palestinian culture, because Jordan is actually a Bedouin country. So the king was somewhere in Wadi Rum or in the south, in a desert encampment, sitting, and there was this American guy there, journalist or someone, and an Arab poet came in, and he's firing off this poetry for the king, and King Abdullah is listening intently, and his entourage is all listening, and at some point the poet goes quiet, like for about 5-10 seconds. So the king thinks, okay, he's done his job, it's enough now. So the king is about to rise, and all of a sudden he says to the king, wait, and the king sits down again, and he carries on with the poetry. Now if you did that to Bashar al-Assad or Saddam Hussein, right, who are not Bedouins, who don't come from those societies, they would like, off with your head, that kind of disrespect in front of my entourage. But the Jordanian king sat down, because really and truly they're all considered somewhat equals. The king of Jordan is considered the head chief of all the Arab tribes. He's very close to the Arabs. His family, his brother, one of his cousins or somebody is a Sufi kind of a sheikh, not a sheikh, but a very philosophic kind of person. He wrote one of the most beautiful books I've ever read, right? And he's quite religious, patron of the religion of Islam and Sufism in Jordan, and he's also a complete full-on, like, you know, like some very eloquent kind of a prince as well. He mentions in that book of his that how he has to represent, and he will literally go and sit with those Arab tribes like he's one of them, and they have to see you as one of them. Even the Saudi princes, each prince has a designated area where they're responsible for, and once a week they will sit there, and if you have any petition, you can literally go up to this king, this prince. Walid ibn Talal, if you watch his Talal ibn Walid ibn Talal, whatever his name is, if you watch his documentary, he's literally doing that. He goes to this place, and the lowliest of the low person, poor person, may Allah ennoble them. I'm not saying low in a bad way, but I'm talking about the dynamics between king and humble person. They will come to him and they will say, we need this. Right? One guy comes to him and says, I need a 4x4 pickup for my work. And the king says, okay, give it to him. And then the prince carries away all of these papers which are petitions from these thingies. And these guys will sing poetry as well, and this prince or the king has to listen, because really he's just the head amongst equals. That's the way the king is seen. So this king then sat down in Jordan and waited for this poet to finish his poetry before he got up again. And the American guy goes, the Westerner says, he goes, that's when I realized the power of these poets. And likewise, the same goes with the royal families in Arabia. They have to serve. They have to serve. If they don't serve, if a traditional desert chief doesn't serve, he's no longer a desert chief anymore. They will replace him with somebody who's more generous from his own family. Right? This is the kind of life, and you're very close. You sit and eat with your people. This is the reason why you sometimes get the princes sitting and eating with the people. I saw a prince on the street getting his car washed. A beautiful sports car, only 4 in the world. He's getting it washed by a Bengali on the street, and he's sitting with his friend, just waiting for the car to be washed on the street on a plastic chair. And I'm speaking to the Bengali, and I said, whose car is this? And he says to me, it's that guy's over there, and he's a prince. The prince obviously saw this Bengali speaking to me, so as I looked up, his eyes met mine. I nodded at him, and he nodded at me. Right? I didn't go and start kissing his hand. I didn't start to, get all excited. Oh, this is a prince. This is a prince. I just nodded, like 2 guys on the street would nod, and the prince nodded back. Right? And he was sitting like a normal person. I had a prince in my class. I didn't even know he was a prince, and I used to shout at him. And when I realized he was a prince, I was like, okay, I need to treat this guy a bit better. Right? And not that I was scared or anything, because I know that his father sent him to a normal school because he wanted his son to grow up amongst normal people. Right? But I mean, it's just like a nice thing in it. Oh, I shouldn't shout at him, he's a prince, blah, 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 privilege and all that. But he was a nice kid, but he wasn't very bright. And a few other stories come to mind that elude me now. So Jordan is a full-on Bedouin society like this, right? Yeah, that's it. I remember when I was in Jordan in 2013, I prayed Jum'ah in the mosque of the king. The king had a mosque built in his area, and I prayed there. And he was there. He came for prayer like a normal person, and he just had a slight guard with him. And then as he went out, he's going out, and everybody's quiet. And then one guy starts to recite something, starts to praise the king. You would never get that in England. Complete silence. And if somebody did do that, they would say, hey, you're breaking protocol. But the society is like Bedouin there, and that's considered the correct course of action. Which, even though it's a similar action, but the meanings behind it are diabolically the opposite when it comes to praising dictators. So when they would do that, when the half of the city would do that, when Hafiz al-Assad or Bashar would ride through the city, that was all fake. That was forced. That was deliberately forced by the security forces that made them do it, and whoever didn't do it would disappear. The same thing happened for Saddam. The same thing happened, and it was done out of fear. Whereas with this king, nobody's there saying, oh, praise the king. If you don't praise the king, we're going to bang you up. If you don't praise the king, you don't praise the king. But nobody praised the king, but just right in the back, one guy decided to start saying a few things, right, praising the king, and that was it. The King Abdullah went, right. So this is, um, imagine this kind of a society. This is what we're talking about when we're dealing with these poets here, and we'll talk more about this inshallah in the next few lectures. So Tarafa became the boon companion of the king. He's very young. He's writing these poems for the king and everything. And we'll talk about why they would write for the kings and everything. And we'll look at different examples of their poetry in other lessons. I don't really want to get into that. I just want to tell you a bit about their biographies at the moment. He took liberties because he was very young, and he produced verses on the king's sister and on his brother. Obviously, the king didn't like that, so the king made up his mind to kill him. But the problem is that people feared, as Hamza Yusuf said, people would fear these guys were like not people to mess with. You don't mess with a poet. Why? Because if you mess with a poet, and especially a poet that has other poets in his family, they will write a poem and your image will get tarnished for the rest of existence, according to them. For 1,000 years, people are going to remember these poems, and they believed when you die, it's over. But what carried forth were your deeds and your name. So if you have and this was the only recreation for the Arabs. So this poem would spread like wildfire, memorized by everybody, and it would destroy the reputation of this king. So he didn't want to do it. He's thinking, you know what? He's a poet, right? So I have to be very careful what I do here. So what he did is he basically, and also plus don't forget the tribe of Bakr is a strong tribe. If you kill him, you're also going to get the tribe making war with you. Al-Hira, yes, the Lukhmites were strong, but there were other tribes in the vicinity that were just as strong, right? Don't forget the tribe of was it Bakr? The tribe of Asad took out a Kindite king. The tribe of Bakr wasn't also a small tribe as well, and I think the tribe of Bakr and the tribe of the other tribe, the Asad, I think they're part of the same confederation as well. We'll look at this in detail, inshallah, when we'll get to this just before the Sīrah. So these are reasons why you don't touch these people. So he called his uncle and nephew and basically said, guys, I'm happy with you. You know, it's all good. You know, you've done a wonderful job. Off you go now. Here you go. Here's some gold. Here's some clothes. Here's some camels. Off you go now. Go back to Bahrain where you came from. You know, I think you should spend some time there and come again next year and write me another poem. And he sent 2 seed letters with them, and he goes that go and give these letters to the governor of Al-Bahrain. And for someone who's on Ustad Ibrahim's course, you know what this meant in part of the Umayyads, right? When a seed letter was given, when Usman sent the people of Egypt back to Egypt with a seed letter, and Marwan had it changed, and the orders were to kill those people, and they came back and they besieged the house, and Uthman lost his life. How somebody can call the Umayyads good, seriously, certainly beats me, man. Anyway, so the same thing happened there. This is a very old theme in these medieval kind of stories. But his uncle got wind of something, saying, you know what? My nephew's been a naughty boy. All of a sudden, the king seems like he's happy with us. He's sending us back. Something doesn't seem right. And you're not supposed to do this. It's punishable, very severely punishable. But his uncle opened the letter up. His uncle was illiterate, and so was, what's his name again? Is it Tarafa? Tarafa's also illiterate. They're excellent poets, but they're illiterate. So they found a boy who could read, and they said, son, translate this to us. And the son said, well, these are your death orders. So his uncle got rid of the letter and made his escape towards the Ghassanid areas, because the Ghassanids are now the only strongest people that can protect you, because they're a direct rival to the Lukhmites. But Tarafa, his uncle said to him, listen, dude, open your letter, because I got a strange feeling that you're also going to be killed. And he said, no, it's all good, man. No. I'm Tarafa. You know, can't you see how he treated me? He was young. He was under 20 at that time. And he was not a bright kid in that regard. You know, he was immature of age. His poetry mentions it. And then he went to Bahrain and he was buried alive by the governor. When the governor read the letter, he was buried alive. He was around 20 at the time, but when his sister wrote his eulogy, she put him at 26. His poetry, Tarafa is one of three poets, the other being Amr bin Kalthum and Al-Harith bin Hiliza, whose fame rests solely on his mu'allaqat, on his mu'allaqa. So his fame solely rests on his mu'allaqa, which we have. Labid considers him, all of the poets, one or two of the others you'll find, he said he's number 2, he said he's number 3, but I didn't want to get into all that, but I wrote Labid here because Labid is a very famous poet as well. We read about Labid considered him the best poet after Imrul Qais. There are over 250 verses attributed to Tarafa, excluding the Mu'allaqa. Some are satirical. This is another theme where this is what everybody's scared of. This is the part that everybody's scared of when they start talking like this. They write satire. In one, he depreciates his brother-in-law, a wealthy man. In another, he chides his uncle for not giving him share of patrimony. So he doesn't bucksh anybody. He doesn't spare anybody. In a few short poems, he makes stricture of his patron, the king of Al-Hira. This is what caused him problems. He also praises his benefactors, which you have to do, which is what they want you to do. His mu'allaqa is composed of his camel, his conduct, and his philosophy in life. He devotes 28 lines to a very graphic description of a camel. They did this, right? They would just spend lines and lines and lines of precious lines on descriptions of their camels or their horse. Its various paces, its back legs, its head, its cheeks, its neck, its upper and lower lip, nose, ears, heart, chest, thighs, shoulders, color, and the lines caused on its sides and belly by the ropes of the pack saddle. This is why I find them boring, by the way. But this is what the Arabs loved. The description is very artistic, impressive, and interesting. Every item is described by means of simple and compound similes which, based on the limited horizon of desert life, are well thought out and well executed. He was a very good poem. After the camel, he speaks of his own conduct and the values he holds dear. He promptly responds to the call of war and enterprise. He has chivalrous disposition. Sometimes he will be found in the serious deliberation of tribal chiefs, sometimes at the tavern. He carries on, but yeah, I wrote this. He carries on, but we leave it here. Except for the part where he describes his camel, the rest of the ode uses clear language and the style is virile and pleasing. If you're going to dedicate so many lines on your camel, boy, is it going to get difficult, right? So this part is very hard for people to understand and read, but the rest of it is in clear language. Most people should be able to understand parts of it. Then is Amr bin Kalthum. He died in 600 AD. He belonged to a haughty family of the tribe of Taghlib in Mesopotamia. Taghlib is one of those tribes we mentioned. So his family thought too much of themselves. His father, Kalthum bin Malik, was a notable and distinguished horseman. His mother was Layla, a proud lady and a daughter of an Arab chieftain and poet, Muhahil. So you're going to get proud if you've got poets in your family. Though young age disqualified one from tribal chieftainship, he was nevertheless elected chief of the Taghlib at the age of 15, which is something rare. His tribe was at war with other tribes, including the Bakr. We mentioned the tribe of Bakr, Tarafa's tribe. The famous war of Bessus. Bessus is the Roman rendition of it, right? Have you heard of this in Jahiliyyah? Have you heard of this war? Anybody heard of this war? No? Okay. Very stupid to say the least. We'll touch upon it more in Jahiliyyah. Very stupid. This is what Jahiliyyah is all about when you read this war. His tribe sometimes had hostilities with the king of Al-Hira, standard practice. Because they're all at war with each other. His tribe couldn't bear the slightest provocation of insult. So there's a story, a very silly story, I would say, about the slightest provocation. His mum was told to get a cup of... His mum was invited to Al-Hira. He was invited too. And the Al-Hira king entertained him, and the king's mum entertained his mum. And at some point, she was asked to give water or something to the mother, and she said, no, get one of your servants to give it. And she said, no, I want you to do it. And then she realized that she's trying to dishonor me. So she turned around and said, help, help, my honor, my honor. And the son, who is Amr bin Kalthum gets up and pulls out his sword and strikes off the head of the king, and then they run away, or the chief or something, and then they run away. I didn't bother quoting the story because I don't find these stories authentic, and the, exaggerations that just don't even look good, to be honest with you. Some of them are actually slightly lewd stories as well about their lives, and they're not even true, and I'm not going to quote them. So he was not a professional poet. Besides his mu'allaqah, there is very little. In its present form, it does not exceed 100 lines or so, but the reports mention that it was an epic of 1,000 lines. The mu'allaqah opens with a call to the mistress to awaken and give him a cup of fine wine. This is the same for all of the poets, right? They start like this, talking about a woman. He describes this in 3 lines. He then asks her to pause before her departing and listen to the expressions of his love for her and sadness at her leaving. The rest, I'm not going to quote, you know why, it gets very lewd. After this, he turns to his real theme. He calls upon Amr bin Hind, the king of Al-Hira, and warns him not to embark on any hasty action against his tribe and to listen to what he has to say. The next 30 lines contain, in animated language, a resume of the glory of his tribe, its warlike zeal and military achievements over the people of Najd, al-Iraq and Syria. One distinctive mark is that he does not mention at all the camel. So there's no mention of camel in any of his poetry, the most indispensable partner of the Arab, possibly as he is not native to Arabia, but he's from Mesopotamia. Mesopotamians didn't value camels like the desert people. Horses were more prized to them for war and whatnot. It is the easiest of all the mu'allaqat. His style is simple but vigorous. It is not dull, cramped like Tarafa. Al-Harith bin Hiliza, his claim to fame rests entirely on his mu'allaqah, again, belonged to a clan of the Bakr bin Wa'il and suffered from leprosy. So there's a story about him going to the king, and when you go to the king, he respects you by seeing you in the open. When lepers, people with leprosy would come, the king would only speak behind a curtain. And this is considered disrespectful to the leper as well. And they would wash the floor from your footsteps. But he did this, and in the beginning the king did this, but when the king heard how beautiful the poetry was, the king opened the curtain and said, "Come and sit next to me," and he sat next to him. So his poetry devotes 8 lines to the nasab, which has nothing interesting or graceful in it. After enumerating about a dozen places where he had in the past been or visited the mistress, he winds up the nasab by referring to fire kindled by her on a mound on which her figure is clearly visible. So you can see a theme here now, right? They all write about the same thing. They're literally all writing about the same thing. This follows by a reference to his she-camel in 5 lines. Her quick pace is likened to that of an ostrich that runs with the utmost speed on sensing the presence of hunters in its neighborhood. He then turns to the Arikim. So sections of the Taghlib, these are tribes, that they level false charges against his tribe and are without justification preparing for war. It carries on for a total of 82 boring lines. It is a dull read. Neither its words nor meter move with vigor. It is quite difficult to follow, not because of the obscurity of expression, but because of its inadequacy and difficult in the reader grasping the ideas easily. So there is, you would think that it shouldn't really belong there. And from what I read, it shouldn't have belonged in the mu'allaqat. It just got put there. The poet composed little besides this ode, and his work failed to show any merit. Noldike, a very famous Orientalist, his name crops up again and again, by the way, and he wrote on the Qur'an as well. Noldike asserts that he should never have been there. So people, Noldike may be correct in suggesting that Hamad is the collector that placed his poem in the mu'allaqah simply to please the Banu Bakr, whose client he was. Yeah, this is most probably correct, because why would you place somebody whose poetry isn't that great? Which again, right? Oh, the mu'allaqat, the best of what they have. Actually, not really. Al-Nabigha. His full name is something else. This was one of his name known by this pen name, which people probably gave him. Died in 604, the most wealthy and respected professional poet of the 6th century. He belonged to a noble family of the Banu Dubyan, a tribe that dwelt in Najd. Have you noticed all of these tribes are in the Najd area? His name was Zaid bin Muawiyah and his kunya Abu Umama. He was acquainted with many pre-Islamic poets including Zuhair, Abid bin al-Abras, Bishr bin Abi Khuzim, Labid, Hatim al-Ash'a, and Hassan al-Khasa. Little is known about his family or early life. He had a long and intimate connection covering 50 years with the king of Al-Hira. He also lived with the princes on the Syrian border. These are the Ghassanids. This association improved his manner and outlook. He was quite aristocratic in his behavior and his outlook, sitting and eating at the king's tables. They say he would eat with golden knives and forks. I don't believe that. But what they're trying to say is he had good food and the way kings ate. He was a court poet of 3 Lukhmid princes, Al-Nu'man III, Abu Qubas, his father, and his grandfather. He was the boon companion of Al-Nu'man, who was his greatest patron. But court intrigue is deadly. Nobody survives court intrigues. You want to get close to the king, you're playing with fire, and one day you shall get burnt. That's what happened to him. An ambitious young poet by the name of Al-Munakhel, who envied Al-Nabigha, brought him into disgrace with his patron. The king, see, this is why I don't believe this story. The king, who was ugly, had a beautiful wife called Mutajarrida, whom he asked the poet to compose verse in her beauty. So the king is now describing, this is against Arab manliness, right? This is completely against Arab manliness. Arabs don't do these kind of things. Right, so he's asking to describe his wife. Okay, if she was a slave girl, then yeah, I can understand. But a wife, no way. And Al-Nabigha, even he wouldn't do this. But he did this, and he describes her body parts, including the hidden parts, says the story. Then Al-Munakhil made the queen believe that Al-Nabigha had unhealthy, and made the king believe that he had unhealthy relations with her. Right? I mean, the akhbar are written, but this is not something that I would quote to anybody, because you need to have a bit of common sense here. Al-Munakhil had to escape. He went to, it's not Al-Munakhil, it's had to escape. He went to the Syrian princes because there's nowhere else to go. They're the only powerful princes that can protect you, and he became attached to their court. I wrote this bit. This story seems made up. Yeah, actually I didn't write this. I took it from the source. This story is made up because he was known as a sensible person, a very thoughtful person, and he would know better than to do something like this. The rulers are crazy. You don't do stuff like this. He wrote verses for 2 Ghassanid princes, but while he was there, he always pined for his old companion, the king, whose wife he supposedly wrote the poetry for, right? So he heard that the king was ill, so he paid the king a visit with a poem. The king reconciled with him and he regained his privileges. Another version says that the king realized that it was all a plot and it was all wrong anyway. He lived in luxury and was once gifted 1,000 black camels along with offspring. He lived a very refined life. Once in Yathrib, he recited some verses. In one of the verses, there was a slight flaw. So the people realized the flaw. He didn't realize it, but this is the respect that's due to poets or your teachers. You don't correct them like this. You do it indirectly. So he was someone of high esteem. So they didn't want to correct him. So they got a songstress and said, can you sing his poem? When she was singing the poem, he realized there was a problem in the intonation, because the poems have to rhyme, right? So there's always an intonation in Arabian poetry. And then he realized his mistake, and then he corrected it, and he never recited it again. The Caliph Umar is reported to have called him the best poet of Ghatafan, which comprised a number of Najdi tribes, including the Dubyan. These names keep coming up. On listening to an ode addressed to Al-Nu'man in self-exoneration, the Umayyad Caliph Abdul Malik declared him the best Arab poet. However, we guard ourselves against such unqualified remarks. Who is Abdul Malik and who is Umar? Umar was someone that was a good poet, was a new poetry himself, but and they say Umar was a judge at the Okaz market as well. That's why when Umar heard the Quran for the first time, he was like, "Whoa, what is this? I've never seen something like this before," because he understood the beauty of it because he was a poet. That's also like why Walid ibn Mughira was al-Mughira. When the Quran was recited in front of him, he was bewildered, and he came out of the house. And pardon me if I got the name wrong, right? In the Sīrah we touched on the story. He came out the house, and Abu Jahl goes, "What? Have you been bewitched?" And he goes, "No, I've not been bewitched, but by Allah, what he said, let him be." And his words, the beginning of it is sweet, and the end of it is this, and this is of this, and he said it in a poetic way also. And he said, if he wins, i.e. the Prophet, if he wins, then you shall share in his glory. And if he loses, i.e. nobody believes in him, and it will die out anyway. Right? So just let him be. So if Umar made this remark and Abdul Malik made this remark, it's probably because they felt that the one poem they heard was great, but it doesn't mean that all of them were of the same level, and we are wary of such remarks by people who are not fully qualified. His poems consist largely of eulogies and satires and are concerned with the strife of Hira and Ghassan. Right? So the fight between the two powers of the region and of the Banu Abbas and the Banu Dubyan. Love of adventure, so prominent in the poetry of Imr al-Qais and Tarafa, is wanting in his poetry. He was a sensible person. A lot of his poetry, this nonsense he didn't talk about. There is no mention of wine, pleasure, or hunting scenes. His praise is unexaggerated and dignified. His themes are bravery, generosity, wisdom of his benefactors, simple satire, neither dirty nor bland, which makes me want to read his poetry now. A number of poems addressed to the Luqmite royal house against all slander. Several poems relate to local or intertribal affairs. The tone of his poetry suggests that he was a sensible man and a lover of decency and peace. His nasib, his amatory prelude. This is the name gives it away. Amatory prelude. The prelude is the beginning of the poem. You start the poem by pointing them out to something. This is very interesting. The Quran is the same. Well, I'm saying this, okay? So I need to qualify that I'm unqualified. But the way I understand it, when you have words like Alif Lam Mim or Noon, and then the verse starts, right? And then the verse starts, and then it changes again into a different meaning all of a sudden. Why does the Quran do that? Imagine the way I visualize it is when you see, for example, people in a schoolyard, and then you get the bell, or you want the teacher to just listen to you, and then you have like that triangle, ding-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling. It was triangle, and it was like they would hold the triangle thing, and then they would have another thing in their hand, like a stick, and it's a musical instrument we used to have in school, and then you bang it, and you keep banging it until everybody goes quiet, and then you carry on ding-a-ling, ding-a-ling, ding-a-ling it until everybody's looking at you thinking, okay, what do you want? And then finally, when you've got their attention, then you stop, and then you say what you need to say. So the Quran, when it says like Noon, yes, for a lot, they have meaning, but one I've understood it, that one of the meanings is also that it makes the person stop in his paths and think, what is this Alif Lam Mim? And it's saying it in such a long way, and it's saying it in such a way where you're forced to look and say, okay, what's going on here? So a lot of these preludes had the same function. They start by talking by amatory. Amatory, this is to do with love, the woman, sex. They start like this because they want to draw you in, and then they immediately change and they go off onto the main bulk of their poem, which is praising their tribe, or a satire against somebody, or describing a desert journey or something like this. Right? So the only part of their poetry that I do like is the amatory preludes, minus the lewd stuff. So his amatory prelude, the nasib, though of pre-Islamic pattern, had sometimes novel and striking comparisons. Sorry, my recording screen is in the way. How do I move this to the side? On the whole, his style is agreeable except for words and end rhymes which to the modern student appear difficult or unfamiliar. Here's something of his. So just to wake up somebody, Shahid, you've done very well today. Alexa, if you're still in the group, can you read? This is his prelude, by the way. You'll see how it's quite tame compared to all the others. Alex is gone. Okay, Shahid, are you there?
I am.
Alex, you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Alex,
Sorry,
do you want to read that?
Absolutely. From the top, yeah?
Yeah.
The veil dropped. She did not mean to drop it. She picked it up and she...
Well, okay. You're not free verse rapping here. You need to say this in a way that sounds a bit poetic.
Oh no. How would I do that?
The veil dropped. She did not mean to drop it. She picked it up and shielded herself from us with her hand. Something like that.
Really good. You set a high standard there. The veil dropped. She did not mean to drop it. She picked it up and shielded herself from us with her hand. With a tender, tinted palm, as if its fingers were tendrils on their boughs, which did not dry. And with profuse, curly coal-black hair its growth, like a vine that leant against the propped trellis. She looked at you with a need she could not express, the look of the patient at the faces of visitors.
Okay, so that's just a little bit of his prelude. It's quite tame compared to the others, but he's describing a woman here. So all of them would start their poems by describing a woman like this, and that would draw in the Arabs before you'd switch subjects and then mention something else. And the Quran does this, right? How many times do you see the Quran jumping from subject to subject? And sometimes it's quite jarring. So Allah is mentioning one thing in a beautiful way, and then all of a sudden it just switches subjects and it becomes jarring. It doesn't flow anymore. But it drew the people in, and now all of a sudden it's taken you to another subject and drawn you into another subject. So that's the prelude here. And the only reason I put this one in is because it's really tame. But he's basically using language that's imagery that's familiar to the Arabs in describing. So curly coal black hair, coal from cooking, like a vine that leant against the prop trellis. This is one of the most beautiful things that they can imagine. Why? Because greenery in the desert, they would have walled gardens, and the walled gardens would have grapes that they would make wine from. So like a vine that leant against the prop trellis. If you end up in the desert and then you end up all of a sudden in a walled garden, that's like Jannah for you. She looked at you, and by the way, those walled gardens are no way as beautiful, because there's depictions of them in the Sīrah, and you can see like Persian walled gardens, Chinese walled gardens, but no desert walled garden is any way, shape, or form as beautiful as European, like English walled gardens or Chinese walled gardens. Why? Because, man, those two countries are Jannah. The desert's not Jannah. If anything, it's Jahannam. Whereas England is a green emerald. So if you want to read an evocative story, there's a story called Tom's Midnight Garden. I'm mentioning it because you must have heard of that story. Anybody heard of that story? Tom's Midnight Garden. It's essential reading for kids. It's one of those reads that all children should have read. Read it. Oh my God, that's what I'm going to say. Tom's Midnight Garden. It's not like the Secret Garden. I couldn't get into the Secret Garden. And that the idea of the Secret Garden is not the garden, it's something else. Whereas Tom's Midnight Garden, the whole idea of the story is the garden. It's basically the garden. So like a vine, she looks at you with a need she could not express, the look of the patient at the faces of visitors. So this is how he's describing what look she's giving. So he's probably trying to say the pleasure that she gets when she looks at you is equal to the pleasure, more than the pleasure you get when you look at her. Because when a patient sees visitors after a long time, the patient is so happy and it gives him comfort, helps in his aiding, gives him support. A wanton look, like a pleading wanton look. That's the kind of sultry look he's trying to describe. But that's the best he can do. Why? I mean, we in free verse, you can make this so much better. You can just make it, mind blowing if you want. But he didn't. Why? It's not because he couldn't. Of course he could, but he's restricted by the meter of the poem he's using. He's made it very difficult upon himself, and then he has to find choice words that fit that meter, and this is the only way he can do it. And the fact that he did this, you think, oh my God, that's amazing. That's amazing, because how did you even get it to be so close to what you're trying to describe? This still gives us a vivid understanding of what he's trying to describe here. Right? Maybe you could have said it in another way, but I think the deeper meaning here is actually very, very deep. And he's managed to do this within the confines of his meter, which is an amazing job, by the way. So then there is Zuhair bin Abi Sulma from 607 AD. He was born and brought up in Najd, again look Najd, and belonged to a well-off and respectable family that produced many poets. His father was a poet, father's paternal uncle was a poet, and 2 sisters were poets. His 2 sons also, and his grandson were poets. Bashama bin al-Ghadir, his father's maternal uncle, played a huge role in molding him. His poetry, most of his poetry is in praise of 2 chiefs. This goes back to a Jahili story, which we look at in Jahili, inshallah, of the tribes of Murrah, which is an offshoot of the related tribes of Dubayan. See, again, that same tribe, and Ghatafan, the same tribe, powerful big tribes. The tribes of Abs and Dubayan had been involved in a long war over a horse race. So this gets as stupid as it gets. Right, this is Jahiliya now. It's called the War of Dahis and Al-Ghabra, and had lost several thousand of their members. And this war went on for 2 generations. It went on for, like the War of Bessos went on for around 40 years apparently. This war went on for 2 generations as well. And it was only when these 2 chiefs of these other tribes thought, you know what, this is enough. Right? Let's restore peace. And he offered 3,000 camels as ransom for those killed. This act roused Zuhair's feelings, and he composed a fine ode and continued to do so for as long as he was alive. Like Al-Naghiba, he was a decent man, moderate in habits. Some verses of his point onto the unity of God. So some of his verses point onto the unity of God and the Day of Judgment, which is interesting. The Caliph Umar appreciated some of his verse. When asked why he held him in such high esteem, he is reported to have said that Zuhair doesn't use uncouth language, obscure words, not praise anyone for qualities which he does not possess. How do you spell praise? Am I spelling it right? This is... Hey, why?
Yeah, it's correct at the top. P-R-A-I.
Is it? Why did I was confused with Pereri?
It's a strange looking word when you focus
Yes,
on
exactly. That's why I was a bit surprised. I was like, that doesn't sound right. But so you will find that there were 2 poets. There were 2 poets and there's one poet where even the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said that his verses were so close to Islam, right? But did they convert or not? One of them, you'll see he was so close to converting. We'll read about it now. Nasib or Nasab, I spelled that in both ways. See, you can tell that when I start making mistakes, it's because I've had enough of what I'm doing. There are over 500 verses of Zuhair. They comprise odes and fragments. The odes, including the Mu'allaka, are addressed mainly to the Murrah chief and Harim. So a lot of his work is addressed to these chiefs. Why? Because of the huge service they did for Arabia, basically. They made peace between these 2 warring tribes that went on for 2 generations. An ode in which a hunting scene is described celebrates the valor, the army, the judgment and generosity of Al-Uyayna, the chief of the Fazara tribe and one of the ring leaders of the Ridda revolts. So these names, so this guy was one of the leaders of the Ridda wars after the death of Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. right? So some of these names, this is why I say there are certain select names that we should try to remember. It just ties everything in so nicely. So now you're thinking, why did this tribal chief revolt? Because he was a big entity in and of himself, right? Many of the tribal, why did the Kinda revolt? Because the Kinda were kings before Rasulullah, right? They had Imrul Qais, they had power, they were rivals of Al-Hira, of the Luqmites. How can all of a sudden they be giving money to Umar? So there's always reasons why things happen, and it's nice to know the backstory. So even now, here, look, he is one of the chief revolters. Why? Because he's a person in his own right. I'm not saying that for this particular person this was a reason, but certainly when people try to second guess reasons, they use reasons like this. So his main themes, so he's basically got 3 themes in his poetry. We should know them by now. The nasib, which is the opening description and praise. So the nasib, which is the opening, the description, which is the main part where you normally describe your horse or something, and then a praise for a king. You describe your camel. He's not interested in love poetry and treats the nasib no better than formality. Right? So, it's just basically he's following the conventions of pre-Islamic poetry, but he's not like the others. Portrayal of feminine beauty finds no place in it. It takes the form of a reference to the mistress and her abode, which she abandons in favor of another. So he'll just talk about, he'll go this far and he won't get lewd. He enumerates one by one the desert stations she crosses on her way to the new site of her choice. We will look at the prelude, by the way. You're probably thinking, what is the prelude? We will look at it more in probably now or next lesson. There was some reading material for you lot as well on this. He enumerates one by one the desert stations she crosses on her way to the new site of her choice. Description occupies a major part of his verse. He describes his camel, its speed, its hands, its feet, its head and back, comparing it to a fast desert animals pursued by hunters. Wine, sport, and revel have no place in his poetry. He only has a dozen or so wise sayings in his mu'allaqah, with no evidence that it's in the rest of his corpus. He composes it in a stiff style. His language is also stiff and marked by an overflow of rare words and unfamiliar expressions. There is little variety and freshness in his work. This may be because he had never traveled, whereas the others traveled far and wide. So he didn't have, he was limited to the Arabian desert. So it's difficult to describe what you're trying to describe with limited vocabulary, so you have to find harder and harder words to describe it, which makes his work stiff and not fresh like the others who had a wider vocabulary which they could use in their poems. But then why did Umar say he doesn't use obscure words? See, this is the problems, right? Umar said he doesn't use obscure words, but here we're seeing that he's using, there's an overflow of rare words and unfamiliar expressions. Right. Antara ibn Shaddad. There's a BBC podcast in our time that I want everybody to listen to. It's 45 minutes. It's about Antara ibn Shaddad. Have you heard about this guy? Anybody?
No, we haven't.
Okay.
No.
Antara, a very, very good poet. He was actually a slave. His father had a Abyssinian slave, and he was born a lowly birth, the son of an Abyssinian slave, and he stayed enslaved, living the life of slaves, which was not very nice back then. And his father didn't really think much of his son, didn't really care for him, because a slave is a slave is a slave. And because he was working with horses and everything, he managed to teach himself horsemanship and swordplay, which basically helped him gain his freedom. Because what happened is his tribe was invaded by another raiding tribe that drove the animals off, and they pursued the raiders accompanied by Tarafa. Tarafa was also part of the same tribe, right? So Tarafa was also there, and they chased the raiders. Now he was there as a fully grown man, healthy man, doing nothing. And his father said, Go, son, go and chase the enemy. To which he replied, a slave cannot charge well, cannot fight well, and cannot do anything. A slave just does the manual stuff of the camp, right? And then his father was forced to say to him, charge and you are free, go and I shall free you, in desperation. So at that, he got on his horse, charged, and he fought so well, and he earned distinction for himself, not only in this battle, but in many other battles. It was his freedom that spurred him to basically start writing poetry. That was his inspiration, and from then onwards, he started to write poetry. His poetry is really good. You know, when we say really good, you know, we're talking linguistically here, right? And he had this extreme love for his cousin Abla. All of the poetry you get for Abla, some of it is probably his, and there's other people writing, and you know, we can't say it's his. And he couldn't marry her because obviously he's the son of a slave, right? And it didn't help that he was black as well. Racism existed in a, you know, like in a fully European 18th century European style way. Racism existed amongst the Arabs. And you know what really annoys me? What really annoys me? A bit of a tangent just to keep you awake. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, I've heard one of my teachers say that he was not dark like the other Arabs. He was from the north. He was from Sham. He was white. Come on, why do you have to do that? As if, what is it? What's the racism with black skin? And he's Pakistani. And Pakistan's all black. Does that mean all of you are ugly? You will come across academic tracts saying that you will be punished. Like it's a heinous thing to say that Rasul was dark-skinned. Why? Is it because you associate dark skin with slavery? You treated slaves dark? Because the Arabs are black, man. Compared to me, seriously, compared to Alex, I'm black. But compared to me, Arabs are black. Right? But compared to the Arabs, Abyssinians were black. So I don't understand the racism that Khalijis really have, because for me, man, they're black, right? And Rasul was the same color as them. He was of them. Yes, he was a slighter shade, you get some people that are a bit lighter, a bit darker. Like you get this in Pakistanis as well, bit lighter and a bit darker. He was of a lighter shade, and I believe why, so that he could stick out from the crowd. That's the only reason why I believe he was a lighter shade, right? And the Sahaba, what color were the Sahaba? Dark. We have this in narrations and traditions. And Rasul described Musa alayhi salam, and he described him with the face of one of the faces of one of the tribes, and they were very dark-skinned people. Right? So for people to turn around and become apologetic like this and say, no, the Prophet was white, and come on, man, be realistic, be realistic. Right? I believe that Rasulullah was probably my color. And I'm not white. I'm not dark, and I'm not white. And racism was in full swing, man. The racism even if I'm not mistaken, even in his Muqaddimah, what's his name again? What's his name, people? The one who wrote the Muqaddimah. It slips me today.
Ibn Khaldun.
Ibn Khaldun, yes. Ibn Khaldun in his Ibn Khaldun's racist, right? The Arabs are a bloody racist people. We have to admit, most people are racist. But traditionally, most people were more racist than they are now. Either because they believe they've been brainwashed that it's not politically correct, or they just keep it inside them now because it's not politically correct, right? And let's not shy away from the fact that the Arabs were racists. And they're still racist now. And even now in Arabia, certain girls, if you're dark skinned, you don't get married that easily. Just like in India and Pakistan as well. So because of that racism, he couldn't marry her, even though he was someone of great valor and honor, and somebody who was... okay, thank you so much for this, Alex. Sheikh Hamza Yusuf did say something. He did mention the words because of the racism of the time. He said these words, but I didn't understand exactly what he was trying to say. You've just clarified that. Yeah, because of the racism of the time. What I understood the same thing, that Sheikh Hamza Yusuf is saying that he was white because people were racist and they wouldn't have took to him that well had he been dark skinned like the rest of them. So he was a bit fairer than them. So they took to him more than they would have otherwise. This is what I'm understanding, and I believe this is what you're understanding as well, what of Hamza Yusuf said.
Yeah, exactly that.
Yep, yep. Okay. So white privilege, Alex. You have what's known as white privilege.
I
You
do.
go to the
It
third
is a
world,
thing.
it do wonders for you in the third world.
My younger brother went to India once. I can't remember exactly where, and he was basically treated. Was it Mumbai? And he was basically treated like a god.
Yep, white privilege. I saw that in Saudi Arabia as well.
It
It
exists. It
exists.
exists.
It exists.
I as I got older, I've become increasingly aware of it, and there are some real subtleties in it, which maybe isn't the right time to have that conversation now, but it's quite an interesting conversation. Um, yeah, most white people are subtly aware of it, but they don't really realize, they don't really notice it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because they don't travel, and when they do travel, it's normally to Ibiza or holiday resorts where you're you're all gonna get treated like royalty anyway. But
Well, that's true. Yeah. So Morocco is a really good example. So or Turkey. So if you're quite a fair-skinned person, um, you almost act with um, dignity is not the right word, but almost with like a higher class, and the society equally treats you as a higher class. So it's a bit of a cycle that reinforces
negative
itself. It's
reinforcement cycle.
yeah, it really is. It really is. And I think it goes both ways. My personal experience is that I very rarely um, feel like eyes are on me when I'm in a masjid. It's really interesting. I almost go in there expecting, and have done most of for most of my time as a Muslim, I've expected people to be like, "Whoa, you're a white guy." It's very rarely actually happened. Whereas if it was the other way round, if it was white people, if it was a darker skinned person, he probably would feel a little bit more intimidated. So it's an interesting subject that I'm still learning more about, but yeah, it does exist, no doubt about it.
So what did you say as a white person when you go into into the mosque, people rarely look or they do look?
Rarely, yeah. It's I probably feel just as when you're in the masjid and you're focusing,
Yeah.
I feel just as invisible as anyone else. People are friendly, and every now and again, people will show an interest. But yeah, it's not. Um, yeah, I very rarely feel like I stick out or anything like that.
When I used to give da'wah 20 something years ago, I used to tell people that I said, imagine going into a Catholic church on a Sunday, and you as a black person, if you walked in into the church, every head would turn back and look at you thinking, what's a black person from a black church doing in a Catholic white church, right? I mean, they would be welcoming, but there'd be that look for a second like, oh, this is new. Whereas if a white person went into a mosque, nobody would look because it's just normal. You get, especially in the Salafi mosques, because they tend to use the English language more, which everybody should be doing, and there's a healthy mix of all nationalities. Whereas,
Mm.
yeah, whereas the Indo-Pak mosques are sadly a bit lacking in that regard. I keep pushing for them to not use Urdu. I mean, it's one of my pet peeves, the fact that they're using Urdu. And one of the reasons they use Urdu, A, because their imams don't know English, straight out. Their imams are disconnected from mainstream society. See, these are
Mm.
these are things that we should learn and pick up with our mosque committees. It's our job to do this. They're disconnected,
Mm.
and number two is that the reason they give is, oh, we have old people coming, the older generation who need to listen. No, Habibi, the older generation do not come to the mosque anymore. The older generation all sit at home now. They're in their 70s and 80s, right? Anybody who comes to the
Mm.
mosque, they all speak English, and even the guys in their 50s and 60s all speak English. So the argument that we need to It's just a poor argument. And we've missed the boat and we've missed the tide as well, right? And this is my
to some degree. I think when I first started going to the mosques all those years ago now, it was hard to find an English-speaking one. Whereas these days, almost every Jummah I go to would be in English now. But maybe it's my location.
You're lucky, man. I'll show you
Changed.
mosques up and down the country where they're speaking in Bengali, they're speaking in Urdu, and like there is a Somalian mosque that I know, and most of the congregation are Somali. So probably there it's going to be Somali. There's a Nigerian mosque as well. Most of the congregation are Nigerian, but mixed congregations. But it should still be in the English language. And that's why
Yeah.
nobody goes to those mosques. If we go to a Barelvi mosque, 99.9% are going to be Pakistanis. Why is a white person not coming there? Because what's he going to do? I've personally experienced this with people that I brought into the mosque and they never came back again. Because what are they going to do? There's no.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
just.
I have noticed as well the difference between a multicultural mosque and single ethnicity mosques as well. They're far more likely to be in English at the same
I used to
time.
give da'wah, and I used to send people to Salafi mosques. And I was told, why are you sending them to Salafi mosques? Why are you making them Wahhabi? Send them to our mosques. And I'm like, yeah, right. What's he gonna do in your mosque? You can't. You can barely speak English, and what's he gonna do? Right? No, we can
Mm.
communicate. No, he doesn't want that. He doesn't want a freshy accent. He doesn't want all that headache. He wants to learn Islam pure and clear, like he learned it in school, right? Not from someone who's struggling to speak English and he's thinking, oh my God, this isn't working.
Mm.
I'm going to go off on a rant. So I just have huge problems with this. And I've been talking about this for the last 20 odd years about how I don't like this, this stuff. And, if it was up to me, I would just forcibly retire every single oldie that sits on a board of any mosque in England. And I would keep them on the advisory boards if they can speak English. And I would put homegrown youth in there, educated technocrats in there, right? And to take the mosques into the 21st century, like they have in the States. Who's seen Epic? Who's seen the Epic Mosque in Texas?
Haven't, but I'm literally about to look now. Epic,
EPIC.
EPIC.
You know what? YouTube this mosque, the documentary on this mosque. It's amazing what they've done. It's absolutely amazing what they've done there, man. This is how it should be in every single mosque in England. Just watch the documentary of Epic. Epic is where Yasir Qadi teaches from, does these talks from. All of you watch the documentary on Epic Mosque, by the way. Right, okay, back to our stuff. So he couldn't marry his cousin Abla, even though he was a renowned, he had all the qualities of a man, but he was black and his mother was lowly slave, so he couldn't um, marry her. And he mentioned it in his poetry. So in his poetry, again, he's talking about the same things, right? He's talking about, we'll have a look at that on the page, but there's one interesting thing here that I want to mention. So there was this war between Dahis and Gabra. This was the horse war. This was a very, very silly horse war. We're going to look at this and the Bessus war in Jahiliyyah. The Bessus war is so complicated, I don't understand it. I'm going to try my best to translate it to you. If I can't, you're just gonna, just be like me and be confused. But this war between a mare and a horse is that went over 2 generations is the most stupidest thing I ever heard. 2 tribes had a race between a horse and a mare. The horse was about to win. One tribe cheated. They made the horse lose. So followed 2 generations of war, right? And it's just silly, right? So even we mentioned this in the previous story, and the previous poet Nagiba wrote poems for the 2 kings the 2 chiefs, because they ended up making peace between the tribes, right? Now this poet took part in those wars. He took part in the long wars. So you see how this stupidity affected all of Arabia. Everybody is linked with everybody else. You're linked with tribes. And if one tribe fights, you have to go and fight. And it involves everybody. And you have this madness going on that was going on for centuries before Rasulullah came and changed it all. And that's the same madness that, to a degree, we're seeing in Afghanistan. pre-America. So from when the warlords took over, Taliban came in, up till the time that America came in, and then it carried on for a while, and now it's more stable. But that was the same madness that we saw in Afghanistan as well, right? So a race was arranged with a price for 100 camels. Okay, this is the story here, right? This is 2 generations. He was killed by an assailant while returning. So he was killed by an assailant while returning from Banu Laban, a branch of the Tay. Another story says he died just of old age or of cold in the desert. There was a cold summer, and sometimes it gets very cold. This particular rock here on the right hand side, by the way, it's guarded off in Arabia. This rock is the rock where it's said that he described in his poetry where he used to meet Abla. So during his slavery, he composed very little poetry. It was freedom and a love of adventure that brought the poetry out of him. His love for Abla and his romantic poetry is contested. His love is correct, right? He mentioned Abla in his poetry, but the rest of his poetry that mentions love poetry, we don't know if it's authentic or not. He's printed Diwan consists of over 1,600 verses. Many verses deal with tribal war, raids, and the contempt shown him by contemporaries for his low birth and color of his skin. This depressed him, but he is not discouraged. He puts the critics to shame by descriptions of his generosity, good deeds, his kindness, moral purity, and aloofness from unworthy acts. The great majority of his poems celebrate his own heroism, military zeal, intense passion for honor and glory, and his love, alas, his love, alas, as in unrequited love. He has 2 poems in praise of the Persian emperor Anushirwan, who he once met. So that's a big thing, right? For a lowly person like that, the son of a slave and black, to end up meeting the emperor. And this is the emperor, world emperor. It's like meeting Trump or Putin, basically. That's a big achievement for a lowly black slave. That's a massive achievement. We can't understand how unprecedented that is, right? And the Persians were also very racist to black slaves. Up till very recently, they had slaves. So up till, you can even see images of the, photography's been around for 180 years now. And you can see early photographs of them with their slaves. Don't forget, slavery was only abolished in Saudi Arabia in 1958. King Faisal went to the Waldorf Astoria with his black slave. And horror of horrors, the slave sat on the same royal table to eat. I mean, that's not how the Americans treated their blacks. No blacks, no dogs, no Irish, remember? The blacks were ostracized in the land of the free, home of the brave, as late as the 1950s. But slavery as the Muslims knew it was very different, by the way. It was very, very, very different. In fact, if you were a slave of the king, you were free. Slavery didn't mean you were chattel slaves tied anywhere, like Western slavery, which was something unprecedented in human history. And Roman slavery wasn't much better, by the way. But Arabian slavery certainly wasn't as brutal as this. So you could be free. I told everybody to read the book Thizla. When Thizla crossed the desert, the 1 hour video that I did for YouTube called Man and His Camel was based on that book. He mentions meeting one of the slaves of one of the chiefs, 2 slaves of the chiefs, and they were haughty and they had some power about them. You know, if you're a slave of a king, right, you're free to do your business every day and you just serve when you have to serve. And they were haughty, and people were kind of afraid of them as well because they were the king's slaves. So you have this king with the slave on his own table because the Muslims didn't differentiate. You know, the king would eat with his damn slaves, as I told you how when we mentioned about Jordan and we mentioned about Saudi Arabia. And America said, listen, dude, he goes, look, we're doing business with you. Right? And come on, this needs to stop now. Slavery, it needs to stop. So slavery was stopped. And what's very annoying is that in the Arab world, the Arabs to this day call black people abd. because black people were slaves in Arabia. If you see black people in Arabia who are in their 80s now, most probably as youngsters they were slaves, or they were freed slaves, or sons of freed slaves, or going back 1-2 generations like that. And there's a lot of black admixture amongst the Arabs. And I came across one haughty Saudi, and he was Yemenite. He was Yemenite, but he grew up in Saudi. And he had two statements that I didn't like of him. One is, Imam Abu Hanifa, stop praising him, right? This is what the Salafis say. Stop praising them too much. They were people who served the deen and they went. Yeah, there's so much wrong with that statement. Let's not even get started about how wrong that statement is. And then the second thing he said is that he said, we say as a joke to black people, Saudi black people have nationality now. He said, if it wasn't for King Abdullah, you'd still be serving us, right? And I've heard a girl in Jordan, her own best friend is black, by the way, but when she's with her family, when she refers to a black friend, she uses the word abd. It's just ingrained old racist words, or words with no racial connotation, but it's part of their culture because black people were unfortunately slaves in their culture. So this is what this guy did. Oh yeah, I was saying that if you look at old pictures of Iran, you'll see the slaves, and you can read vivid descriptions of their slavery as well. And we know about chattel slavery, we know about Arabian slavery, and we know about modern day slavery in Yemen, which still exists, and modern day slavery in Mauritania, which still exists. But we don't hear about Persian slavery, right? And it's very kind of, you thinking, nah, not you as well. You know, the hybrid Persians, not you as well. And one thing that's really sad is when you read about Mauritanian slavery, right? The stories that I've read about Mauritanian slavery are horrific, and it's really sad. Even Yemeni slavery, it's really, really sad. All slavery is sad, to be honest with you. We're talking like barbaric stories. Right, so his mu'allaqah has 94 lines, which are which are dull and in a grave style. His verse always thrills with pleasure. It has ardor and elegance. So this is Antara ibn Shaddad. Here's the BBC podcast. Just type into YouTube, or just do a search BBC Radio 4 Antara ibn Shaddad. It's very nice. It's very, very good reading. Read it. And there's a YouTube movie series on him in Arabic if you're interested as well, by the way. It's a whole movie series in Arabic about his life. Then we have Al-Asha. Like so many noted poets, he also was a native of the highlands of Najd. We keep coming across that same name. I wonder why all the best poets came from that area. Is it because they were very close to Al-Hira, so they could get patronage and everything? He was not from an influential family. He acquired considerable social status by dint of his poetry in association with great men in and outside Arabia. His poetry confirms contact with the princes of Hadramaut, Najran. He well-traveled. So his poetry attests to the fact that he was in Hadramaut with the princes there, in Najran with the princes, Al-Hira with the princes, and also the Sassanian rulers of Persia as well. He also represented his tribe as a salesman in important affairs. Not salesman, it should be like some kind of diplomat. In one poem, he begs the king of Al-Hira to release his tribesmen and their cattle seized by him. His request was granted. In another, he protests to the Persian monarch against the detention of 2 chieftains of his tribe as hostages on their raiding some villages in Al-Iraq. Again, it was granted. In a third poem, he condemns and warns a number of tribal leaders who want to harm his tribe. Like Tarafa, Al-Asha lived by poetry. He traveled. While I'm at it, just 1 minute. Like so many noted poets, right, he was native. He traveled widely and visited most of the places known for their culture and prosperity in the Arabian Peninsula, which was the south, the deep south, and the deep north. He had visited the Persian court, the Lukhmites, but we don't know from his poetry if he had ever visited the Ghassanids, kings or the Romans. He was acquainted with the fundamentals of Christianity, so he knew about Christianity and Judaism. We believe he was a monotheist. In one of his poems, he pleads for the worship of one God and advocates a code of conduct that closely resembles the one in the Qur'an. Al-Ashar wanted to convert. This is a bit of a sad story for him. He wanted to convert and set out to Medina with an ode for the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. To Quraysh and Abu Sufyan. What's his death date? 629. The Quraysh and Abu Sufyan tried to stop him by saying, you shouldn't go. If you convert, you won't have any drink, any women, all of this is forbidden. So whatever you're used to as a poet and as a Jahili Arab, you may as well kiss goodbye to it. None of that's going to happen. He goes, I don't care, I'm going to go. Then they said to him, okay, go after the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, because it was for 10 years. So they're basically buying time. Go after 10 years, and when we have the next war, if he wins the war, by all means go. Right? And he was like, no. So then they bribed him. And he knew that if he went to and recited the poetry, he's what they normally give is 100 camels. So he said, okay, give me the 100 camels. They gave him the 100 camels, and then he left. And he never got to see Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. How sad. And they say that his poem was better than Qasidat al-Burda. This Qasida al-Burda, by the way, is by another poet called Ka'ab bin Zuhair, not Imam Busiri. This is the original Qasida al-Burda, and this was recited to Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave him his mantle in real life. So he had the honor of having the mantle in real life, whereas Imam Busiri got the scarf or the cloak in a dream. This was in real life. And expected and handsome. I don't know what I wrote here. For him, the reward was 100 camels. So he took the camels and he died. And he died of old age. And some say that he died en route back to his village. He died just outside his village. His poetry, his diwan, is well over 2,000 verses and has a commentary by Thalab, the grammarian. This isn't important because most of the poems have commentaries, and most other famous poets and most other famous historians would narrate these in a lot of their works. I just copied this. I saw it. I just copied it. But it's an inadequate commentary in that the guy hasn't done a good job. The Diwan comprises of long and short odes, and his Mu'allaka of 75 lines is his longest poem. So all of his poems are shorter than 75 lines. Antara ibn Shaddad had over 1,000 lines, right? This guy has got only 75 lines. 17 verses to the conventional nasab. He also speaks of her physical attractions, which is what they all do. 19 lines deal with his camel. Then look at that. 19 lines then deal with his camel. His most precious poem is only 75 lines, right? And he's wasted 19 lines on describing a camel. Then 39 lines celebrating the many virtues of the tribe of Al-Mundar. This is the brother of the Luqman prince of Al-Hira. His shorter poems are better than the Mu'allaka. Caliph Umar al-Malik, Abdullah al-Malik bin Marwan was a noted fan of his, and he wrote in the style of Ghazal, Mu'ad, Hijr, and Wasf are the main themes of his poetry, and maybe we look at this in the future lessons. He is entirely wanting in Rith and Hikam, and the two popular topics of pre-Islamic poetry. His satire seldom oversteps the limits of decency. Then we have Labid, and this is as far as I got. There's about 3 other poets. Labid is one of them. Right? Labid was in the time of Rasulullah firmly, and we'll talk about this in another lecture. What I will do quickly is I want to compare. I want to have a look at some of their poetry. So are you lot cool with looking at some poetry?
Yes.
All right, cool. Let's find Right, so let's have a look at Tarafa, one of Tarafa's poets. Can you read this, or should I make it larger? Let's make it a bit larger. Right, straight away you'll start to feel bored, by the way. Can we have Nasser? Nasser, would you like to read? Nasser, you read? Yeah, you just read some verses. Nasser there?
No, I've just checked. I don't know
Yeah,
if he
he's not.
was. I don't think he joined. I think he sent his apologies.
I probably did, yeah. Nasser kind of leaves midway and comes back. Okay, can we have Shahid read, please? The poet Shahid.
Can do. The mansion of Kaula is desolate, and the traces of it on the stony hills of Tahmid faintly shine, like the remains of blue figures painted on the back of a hand.
Okay, let's stop here for a second.
While
Let's stop here for a second. What you just read here has got nothing to do with the poem, but it's a description of who? A woman. This is how all Arabic poetry starts. It draws you into something and then it moves forward. So what he's done here, he's talking about a theme called Waquf al-Atlal. Is anybody familiar with this term? Waquf al-Atlal. Standing at the ruins. Standing at the ruins. I first saw this in Imrul Qais's poem and I borrowed it and I wrote a few poems based on that as well, which I will read inshallah with you lot one day. We're going to do a lot of poetry inshallah. So the mansion of Khula. So this is the mansion. Obviously, there's no mansion here. Try translate. Actually, you know what? I was gonna get you lot to translate it, but if I don't set the theme, you lot will not be able to translate it. It's a desert scene, so there's no mansion. It's gonna be a tent, right? It's gonna be like an encampment. So the mansion of Khula is desolate. So what he's done is he's basically had a nice tryst with her or a nice meeting with her, and it's all over now, and she's gone, and her camp's gone, and he will never see her again, and the desert is barren as ever, and that was the only enjoyment that you have in life, to meet with a female companion. It brings some joy into the featureless desert, the baking 50-degree heat of the desert. So the mansion of Khula is desolate, i.e. he's gone to the site and there's nobody there. And the traces of it on the stony hills of Tahmid faintly shine. What traces? I.e. the embers of the fire, maybe the coffee grinds. They didn't have coffee then, no, sorry, no coffee. The embers or the charred bones of what they ate. You know, the signs of the encampment, the dung of the animals, the thrown away stuff by the kids and the women, like the remains of blue fingers painted on the back of a hand. I think he's talking about henna here, God knows. Read the next one.
While I spoke thus to myself, my companions dropped their courses by my side and said, perish not through despair, but act with fortitude.
So this this is a common theme in poetry. So he's now sad, he's now standing there, and his friends come up to him and say, come on, friend. She's gone. Don't kill yourself over her. Let it go. There'll be better days. Perish not through despair, but act with fortitude. In our countries today, it doesn't mean much. If I lose one rose, there's plenty other different roses to choose from. But roses don't grow in Arabia. So when you see a rose, how precious is that rose? And once it's gone forever. So the despair that they felt is far more greater than the despair we would feel. Even though our despair is despair. No one can deny that. But when you're despairing in a rose garden, you're not looking at the roses, fair enough. But you're still in a rose garden. But when you're despairing in hell, that's a different kind of despair in the baking desert. With your beloved by your side, even a baking oven is coolness. But when you're in despair, even a warm day is enough to bake you. Carry on.
Ah, said I, the vehicles which bore away my fair one on the morning when the tribe of Malak departed, and the camels were traversing the banks of Dida, resembled large ships sailing from Aduli, or vessels of the merchant Ibn Yamin, which the mariner now turns obliquely and now steers in a direct course.
Carry on.
Ships which cleave the foaming waves with their prows, as a boy at his play divides with his hand the collected earth.
Carry on.
In that tribe was a lovely antelope with black eyes, dark ruddy lips, and a beautiful neck, gracefully raised to crop the fresh berries of Iraq, a neck adorned with 2 strings of pearls and topaz.
Right, so you would think that he's describing the woman, but I don't think he's describing the woman now. He's actually moved on and he's describing the animal there. So read the last line.
She strays from her young and feeds with a herd of roes in a tangled thicket, where she browses the edges of the wild fruit and covers herself with the mantle of leaves.
Excellent. So his prelude was only up to here. Yeah. That, and the rest of it would be he's moved away to another topic now. Yeah, so he's talking about animals, and then he's probably going to move on to his camel. Yeah, he's talking about his camel here now. Where he's describing, look what's happening here now, right? Her 2 haunches are plump and compact as the 2 smooth valves of a lofty castle gate. Supple is her backbone, her ribs are like the strongest bows, and her neck is firmly raised on the well-connected vertebrae. The 2 cavities under her shoulders are spacious as 2 dens of beasts among the wild lotus plants, and stiff bows appear to be bent under. So he's basically just describing his camel, and you're thinking now he's talking about how she walks here. Her cheek is smooth and white as paper, and her lips are soft as dyed leather of Yemen, exactly. Her 2 eyes like 2 polished mirrors. Right? So you're thinking, what is he doing describing? He's taking so much time in describing his camel. And then he will move on to describing his tribe, or something that happened to him here. Look, and like he censors me, right? And this is for defamatory words which I have uttered but once, because I sought without remissness for the camels of my brother Mabad. So are you getting the idea? This is the theme of all poetry. So you don't really want to read it. So let's have a look at another one. Let's have a read of the poem of Antar. Can we have Alex read, please?
Sorry, it took me a while to get off mute. Have the poets left in the garment a place for a patch to be patched by me? And did you know the abode of your beloved after reflection? The vestige of the house which did not speak confounded thee until it spoke by means of signs, like one deaf and dumb. Verily, I kept my she-camel there long grumbling, with a yearning at the blackened stones, keeping and standing firm in their own places. It is the abode of a friend, languishing in her glace, submissive in the embrace, pleasant of smile. O house of Ablah, situated at Jawar, talk with me about those who resided in you. Good morning to you, O house of Ablah, and be safe from ruin. I halted my she-camel in that place, and it was though she were a high palace, in order that I might perform the wants of the lingerer. And Ablah takes up her abode at Jawar, while our people went to Hazan, then to
Thank you
Mathalan.
very much. Right, so it's basically the same theme. The same, it's just going to carry on. So then look, then he moves on to his camel. I knew that you had intended departing, for verily your camels were bridled on a dark night. Nothing caused my face. See how many times he's mentioned the camel? Look, he's mentioning the camels again. This poem actually seems a bit better than the other ones, by the way. I could read this. Okay, well done. Now this is the poem by Labid. It's a lament. So can we have one of the girls decide amongst yourselves before I pick you deliberately? Who's going to read this? Okay, Rumesa, can we have you read, please?
Oh, Ramesh is not in.
Can we have Aisha reading?
No, I'm here. I'm here.
Okay.
So from the top,
Yeah.
we wither unlike stars, die unlike hills and cisterns. Is it Anna?
Yeah, it's basically he's ended up sticking some words in there. I don't know what he's done, but it's been translated by this person here. So I think I think all of this is deliberate.
Okay.
Anna Shadow. So Anna would be a person, right?
Yeah, I think so. Anna shadowed my protector, esteemed Arbad who's left us, but Anna, do not grieve. All sparrows exit the feast hall. Novelties don't excite me. Is it no?
Yeah, I think he's stuck in. I read somewhere that he's stuck in Welsh words. 1 minute. Actually, here. Let's just quickly have a look what he's done here. The idea came to me last year when I was in Beirut reading a much scholarship on Jahiliya poetry, as I couldn't find in English. Aren't there some uncanny similarities between, say, 6th century Qasida and 10th century Anglo-Saxon poems like the Wanderer? Okay, so he's deliberately tried to do a similitude between this poetry and 10th century Anglo-Saxon poetry. Concreteness and compression of language, journeys across darkness, waste, desolation and violence, wars and barbers, fatalism. So okay, so he's changed these words to these words. Last simile. Yeah, so all he's doing is he's supplementing some words into Anglo-Saxon words because they hold the same meaning, which is quite innovative. Yeah, go on.
So novelties don't excite me, nor words affright me. Men are like encampments that soon become ruins. They come with their kin, leave only land behind when they go. The last herdsman rounding up the stragglers. Man's a shooting star, light turned to ash. Wealth and kin a stain that soon wears away. The work we do inevitably. I'm not sure how to pronounce that.
Gehrorin. Alex, you Anglo-Saxon. What does this say?
Sorry, I actually went off on a different screen then. Is it Gehron? Oh my gosh. Gehron? I have no idea. That's a complete
Take
guess.
a look in your DNA. What does this mean?
Gehron. Let me go take a look.
Don't worry. It's Anglo-Saxon anyway. All right, carry on then.
I actually want to know. So, yeah, bear with me. I'll put it in the chat.
The wise grasp this, the foolish fight it and lose. If my word holds off a while, my fingers reach out for its stick. Anna can tell you stories, bend over them all. Anna try to straighten. Oh, I just realized Anna is not.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anna is an old.
Yeah. I'm reading it like it's Arabic. Okay, that's fine. I'm not even sure how to pronounce it.
Frozen dessert. Okay, frozen dessert. Okay, it gives us some context. The work we do is like frozen dessert.
No, desert. Sorry, I spelled it wrong.
Frozen desert. Okay. Okay, carry on, thingy.
I'm just going to carry on with the pronunciation because
Yeah, just do it.
Anna, I'm like a battered sword that hasn't gotten any less sharp. Don't leave me. The sparrow finds the exit suddenly. Oh, you reproachful. I'm not sure how that's supposed to be read. When the men go off, can your witchcraft tell us who will return? Do you faint because they...
Flet ogriphon.
You make everyone weep for the bursten bodies of the irreplaceable friends of your own youth, but neither the witches nor the necromancers know what the Aeometic intends. Just ask them, how
That sounds like
come the
where
men?
have the men gone or something.
Um,
Carry on.
how come our protectors? They don't even know when the rainstorm will
Okay,
come.
excellent. So I've understood two things from this poem. One is it just switched, so I'm not sure if I even understood it properly. But this sounds like the nasab in the beginning, right? So he's mentioned here, we wither, what has he said? We wither unlike stars, die unlike hills and cisterns. Anna shadowed my protector, esteemed our brother who's left us. Where is the camp he's talking about? Men are like encampments that soon become ruined. So this sounds like it's a lament, and it sounds like the encampment he's talking about. Obviously, the women are gone this time, but he's switched it around. It's like the men are going and the women are left behind. Right? So, and it's the lament of something. So I'm confused as to what it is. Did anybody understand this properly? The transiency of life, I don't know. But when the poems are like this, I like them a bit better because they some of the poems do hold deeper meanings, but 99% of them are just what we just read. So, meaning the other ones. We read this one. Okay, so Aisha, do you want to read Imrul Qais's poem? This is a beautiful a description of Waquf al-Atlal. This is where I took my inspiration from, by the way. Just read the first few lines because this gets a bit lewd somewhere.
Right.
Yeah, keep reading until probably it's okay.
Um,
It seems it's okay till the bottom as well.
Stop, O my friends, let us pause to weep over the remembrance of my beloved. Here was her abode on the edge of the sandy desert between the Hul and Humel. The traces of her encampment are not wholly obliterated even now, for when the south wind blows the sand over them, the north wind sweeps it away. The courtyards and enclosures of the old home have been desolate. How you say that? Desolate. The dung of the wind, wild deer, lies there thick as the seeds of pepper. On the morning of our separation, it was as if I stood in the gardens of our tribe, amid the
Acacia.
sorry,
Acacia.
acacia shrubs, where my eyes were blinded with tears by the smart from the bursting pods of colocynth.
It's a plant.
As I lament thus in the place made desolate, my friends stopped their camels. They cried to me, do not die of grief, bear this sorrow patiently. Nay, the cure of my sorrow must come from gushing tears. Yet, is there any hope that this desolation can bring me
All right,
solace?
cool. So you see that theme now. This is how every single poem they write starts. It starts with a prelude where they're around the campsite and their beloved has gone, and they're very sad. I find this beautiful. This is the only beautiful thing I find about all of these poems. Afterwards, he starts to talk about his affair with her. He talks about what he does, and then he goes on to his own camel and then the journey and everything, and then it ends here with this rain thing. So okay, so what I like about his poem here is his description. So when he says stop, like this language is just so beautiful. Stop, oh my friends, let us pause to weep over the remembrance of my beloved. Here was her abode on the edge of the sandy desert, and he's given it a name, right? So you can actually picture exactly where she was, which adds more intimacy to it. The traces of her encampment, again, which the coals, the burnt bones, everything is gone, just like the desert. And from when the south wind blows the sand over them, the north wind sweeps it away. All that's left is a dusty wind now. And you have two winds. You have the north wind and the south wind. They come in seasons over there. And then the courtyards of the old home have been desolate. The dung of the wild deer lie thick. So you can imagine all of a sudden gone. It's very, very powerful imagery, and I'm sure in the Arabic it's even more. And how it ends. So the way he describes here the rain, he's talking about his horse or camel. But come, my friends, now he's changed to end it now. But come, my friends, as we stand here mourning. So look, so he's still standing there, but he went off onto a tangent. As I rode him, his horse, we saw, or a camel, we saw a flock of wild sheep, blah, blah, blah. We outran a bull. We returned at the evening, and the eye could scarcely realize his beauty for when gaze. So he's gone off on a tangent, as they do in all poetry, and now he's ending it again. And this is, for me, it's nice imagery. He stood all night with his sadhu, but come, my friends, as we stand here mourning, do you see the lightning? So it's over, and your sadness is, whatever remnants are left are now going to be obliterated also. Do you see the lightning? And lightning in the desert, by the way, is a powerful thing to look at. See it glittering like the flash of two moving hands amid the thick gathering clouds. Its glory shines like the lamps of a monk when he has dipped their wicks thick in oil. I sat down with my companions and watched the lightning and the coming storm, because the storms are powerful there. The water, the rain they bring sweeps everything away. It's floods. So widespread was the rain that its right end seemed over Qur'ān, yet we could see its left end pouring down on Sata, and beyond that over Yazbul. So mighty was the storm that it hurled upon their faces the huge cannibal trees. The spray of it drove the wild goats down from the hills of Kunan. You can only understand this if you've actually ever experienced it. It's powerful imagery. In the gardens of Taymah, not a date tree was left standing. So Taymah and all of northern Hijaz, from Medina all the way up to Al-Ula and Taymah and Tabuk, is date palms. Nor a building except those strengthened with heavy stones. The mountain at the first downpour of the rain looked like a giant of our people draped in a striped cloth. The peak of Mujamir in the flood and rush of debris looked like whirling spindle. The clouds poured forth their gift on the desert of Gabit till it blossomed. Straight after the rain, the seeds that have been dormant there for a few years take their chance, and within a day they all blossom. The clouds poured forth the gift, as though a Yemeni merchant was spreading out all the rich cloths from his trunks, as though the little birds of the valley of Jiwa awakened in the morning and burst forth in song after a morning draught of old pure spiced wine, as though all the wild beasts had been covered with sand and mud, like the onion's root bulbs. They were drowned and lost in the depths of the desert at evening. So apparently this ending here is supposed to be fabulous. People find it absolutely fabulous the way he's ended it. But for me it's normal, but that's because I'm not reading the Arabic and I don't know what to look for. This is an old manuscript of one of Labid's poems. The opening lines of a poem, effaced. Look how Labid has said. I'm not sure if you can read this. I'll just make it bigger. So even Labid, he says, effaced are the dwelling places at Mina, whether temporary or permanent. Desolate are their goal and their rijam. And the slopes of Ar-Rayyan, their traces are laid bare, but old and worn, just as the rocks retain the letters graven in them. So he's doing the same thing now. He's starting the poem in the same way. Sites of dwelling are these, of which since they were last inhabited, many a long year has passed with its full tale of sacred and profane months. They have been gifted with the showers of constellations of springs. So again, he's describing the rain. The thunderclouds have risen and fallen, and their torrents in drizzle rains from every cloud of the night, and morning clouds cover the sky, and evening clouds whose thunder peals answer one another, and as the shoots of the wild rockets have sprung up. So again, the desert becomes green, and then the animals, the gazelle and the ostrich, have their young on the two sides of the valley, and the antelope lie quietly. This is typical pre-Islamic poetry, by the way. So look, lamentation for the lost past is particularly tied to a specific place, or is a hallmark of old poetry, and these 9 lines illustrate the theme well. The kind of writing can be sure an occasion, lean towards tedium, but the variety of similes, not to mention the language itself, can also be one in the right mood for it, offer worthwhile evocative amusement. When reading these lines, I thought of Aragorn's mournful recitation of the lament for the days of Rohan in chapter 6 of book 3 of Lord of the Rings. Yeah, I can understand why he did that. It's probably, this is the poem here. Right, okay, that's cool. That's done. Right, so now let's compare that with some famous poems from the West. So, Aisha, can you read this poem? Have you heard of daffodils, by the way? Has anybody heard of daffodils?
No.
It's a very whimsical poem, very fresh, very sweet. And he was walking, the author, William Wordsworth, was walking in some garden, in some park. He was on a trip somewhere and he was walking in the lake park with his sister and he came across daffodils completely covering the sides of the banks of the lake. And he was inspired to write this poem. So, Aisha, do you want to read? Read as a poem because these probably the words will probably rhyme a bit here.
Mhm. I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high o'er vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils, beside the lake beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze, continuous as the stars that shine and twinkle on the Milky Way. They stretched in never-ending line along the margin of a bay. 10,000 saw I at a glance, tossing their heads in sprightly dance. The waves beside them danced, but they outdid the sparkling waves in glee. A poet could not be but gay. In such a jocund company, I gazed and gazed, but little thought what wealth the show to me had brought. For oft, when on my couch I lie, in vacant or in pensive mood, they flash upon that inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude. And then my heart with pleasure fills and dances with the daffodils.
And he's pleased my heart. My heart is filled with pleasure when I'm thinking about the daffodils. So you see here, it's just a completely different style of poem. He's got to the point straight away and he's kept it sharp and he's not talking about everything under the sun. It's a very simple poem on daffodils. Let's have a bit more of a pensive one. Shahid, do you want to read this one?
Because I could not stop for death. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality. We slowly drove, he knew no haste, and I had put away my labour and my leisure too for his civility. We passed the school where children strove at recess in the ring. We passed the fields of gazing grain. We passed the setting sun. Or rather, he passed us. The dews drew quivering and chill. For only gossamer my gown, my tippet only dew tulle. We paused before a house that seemed a swelling of the ground. The roof was scarcely visible, the cornice in the ground. Since then 'tis centuries, and yet feels shorter than the day. At first surmised the horses' heads were toward eternity.
So this has a meaning. It has a deep meaning. It's talking about dying. And because I could not stop for death. And it's nice and tight. I think here is the grave. I think this is the grave if I'm not too sure. But it's a beautiful poem. Poems like this you can get into and read and they stay with you and they have deep meaning. But what do you do with Arabian poetry? This is another really nice one from William Wordsworth. Can we have Alex reading, please? These are famous poems, by the way. I chose the ones that are well known and famous. Alex? Can we have Mariam, please?
I wandered lonely as a cloud. I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high o'er vales and hills. When all
Wait,
at
wait, one
once I
second.
saw a
1
crowd.
second. Is this the same?
Sorry.
Yeah, I think we would read that, Ustad.
Yeah, we read this one. There's another one that's similar. Okay, do this one. Do not stand at my
Okay.
grave. This is powerful. This is really powerful stuff.
Do not stand at my grave and weep. I am not there. I do not sleep. I am 1,000 winds that blow. I am the diamond glints on snow. I am the sunlight on ripened grain. I am the gentle autumn rain. When you awaken in the morning's hush, I am the swift uplifting rush of quiet birds in circled flight. I am the soft stars that shine at night. Do not stand at my grave and cry. I am not there. I did not die.
It's powerful stuff. We won't go into what it means because then we did that last week. I don't mind doing it this week, but I haven't got the mental energy today. So Imrul Case we've read. Antal we've read. We read this one as well. There's some reading material that I want to. So this breaks down some of the words. So why some words are used, right? So this gets into the really interesting part. If you know your Arabic, which most people struggle with this poetry, he's talking about why certain words are used as opposed to other words. So I'll send this to you just to look at. Is it this one? This one's nice as well. So can we have Shahid reading this one, please?
Yeah. One day you finally knew what you had to do and began through the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice. Through the whole house began to tremble and you felt the old tug at your ankles. Mend my life, each voice cried. But you didn't stop. You knew what you had to do, though the wind prayed. With its stiff fingers at the very foundations, though the melancholy was terrible, it was already late enough and a wild night, and the road full of fallen branches and stones. But little by little, as you left their voice behind, the stars began to burn through the sheets of clouds, and there was a new voice which you slowly recognized as your own, that kept you company as you strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing you could do, determined to save the only life you could save.
See, that's a deep poem, and there's nice meaning from there, and meaningful poetry. We've read this one. Okay, so can you see the difference? Immediately, can you see the difference between pre-Islamic poetry and other poetry? Other poetry can be in free verse, or it can be in rhyming verse, and other poetry has meaning. You take away something, whereas very little of pre-Islamic poetry gives you meaning. Did you see that from your little reading? Yeah.
Yes.
Right. So we're gonna have a look at the
Yeah.
different styles of, like, what examples of when they cuss people, when they praise people, rhetorical devices in their poetry. We'll have a look at next week, inshallah. And then in the same lecture next week, we will compare the Quran. So we'll also compare the Quranic style of narrative with poetry, because that's where the relationship is, right? So the Quran came to a people who understood the value of the Quran based on their own poetry. If it wasn't for their poetry, they would be like you and I, thinking, okay, what's so special about this? And then we look at Jahiliyyah, and then Mecca, and then from Mecca we're going to stay in Mecca, and we're just going to move into the Seerah, inshallah. So thank you very much for today's lesson. Any questions?
Not from me. Thank you very much again, as always.
Welcome. Okay, for homework, everybody, I'll post it up as well. Write a poem in normal English. You can use the script if you want with the alphabets. That would be nice, but we're going to move away from the script for a while because I just want to see your talent free flowing. So write a poem, because quite a lot, maybe once a month or something, we're going to write a new poem on Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, or on Jahiliya, or on Arabia, or on anything that we've learned so far. Yep.
Yep.
Did you say in English?
In English, yes, in English. What I'll do is this week you're gonna write a poem in normal English, like a normal thing. But as I'm gonna give you some homework. You're gonna have to read something on Wuquf al-Atlal. It's just a, a, a newspaper extract on standing at the ruins, which is the prelude of pre-Islamic poetry. So this week you're going to write a normal poem and hand it in, read it in class next week. And next week, because you've read what a prelude is, your next poem will be where you have a prelude, right? So you're going to write a prelude, a poetry that includes a prelude, right? And then I'll show you what I did. I wrote about 4 based on the same newspaper article that I saw about 2-3 years ago. And I want you to read the same article and see what you come up with, and then we'll compare poems. Right, and mine are actually based on, I took the prelude and then I added a desert journey, which actually happened. It was a bus journey. There was no camel, there was no gazelles and none of that business, ostriches. It was just a bus going to Jordan, and my travel companions and service stations. And I did model them on particular women. They were either women that were in my class, students that I had spoken to before or something, and I kind of orientated it their way with something that had happened between them and me, like some memorable event that had happened, and then I tried to add it in the poem. I'm not sure if it will actually show or it's just in the background, but it's nice to see how that poem would then relate to the poems of old, right? I just tried my bit, and I'll present them, and then
Let me see.
What's that?
Sorry, Zed, I'd had my microphone off.
All right. Okay. Cool.
Mute.
Right. So you know what to do when I send you the article to read. In the meantime, just write a normal poem for next week, inshallah, and then we'll all look at each other's poetry. Try to write it on whatever you've learned so far, or on Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. I'm guessing everybody will write it on Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Cool, yeah? Okay, so thank you very much for attending. May Allah reward us, and inshallah we'll catch up again next week. Sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Muhammadin wa ala
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullahi.
يليق بكماله اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على أسعد ما محمد وعلى آله عدد كمال الله وكما يليق بكماله اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على نور الهدى محمد وعلى آله عدد كمال الله وكما يليق بك اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.